So, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, um, please take your seats if you haven't already. I'm very happy to welcome you all in this room to this event on housing policy. I'm also very happy to welcome the people who have joined us online. So this event is being broadcast to the world, as it were, and will be recorded, just so you know that. So my name is Andrew Watt. I'm the quite new general director of the ETUI. I just started here in October. I do apologize for my voice, which I can assure you is from too many meetings and not from too much partying here in Brussels. So this has the advantage that I will keep my introduction also quite short, which is actually a policy I like to adhere to in any case. So housing, I mean, you will come to this meeting, so you don't need to be convinced, I'm sure, of what a crucial topic it is. And it's a very cross-cutting topic. I come more from let's say from the economic side. So it's discussed there very much in terms of the effect of house prices, for example, on macroeconomic developments. But it also has a big impact now in the recent cost of living crisis, issues about energy, the cost of energy, the cost of insulating houses. It's important for labor mobility, for the whole debate about how we get enough public investment in Europe, but also with more issues in the social policy domain, homelessness, for example, which we'll discuss in the second half of this meeting. And it's been long recognized, I think, at the national level as a topic with all those crucial dimensions. What is still fairly new is its recognition at the European level as being an issue for also for European policy. It's not immediately obvious, I have to say, and this is something I hope to learn also during the meeting, exactly what the European level can do. No, it's not immediately obvious, let's say, but we will address that in the speeches and the discussions that you will hear and participate in during the day. The most concrete expression of this is this new European Affordable Housing Action Plan, which the Commission has promised to deliver. And here we will get, in particular, this is the mandate, of course, and the mission of the ETUI, to get some views from the trade union side on this, and also from a number of researchers and social NGOs. It's a new topic for us as a research and education institute, and we have commissioned some research which will be presented in the second half of this event, which will be chaired by Bart van Hekke, the head of research at the ETUI. I'll be chairing the first session, and I'll just say a few words of introduction about that. First of all, let me apologize on behalf of the General Secretary of the ETUC, Esther Lynch, and also Jan-Willem Gudrian from EPSU. Both of them, well, Esther was supposed to address the meeting at the start, and Jan-Willem participate in the first panel. So both of them have flown at short notice to Turkey. You may have heard in the news that a number of leading trade unionists in Turkey have been arrested, are now in prison. And I ask for your understanding under those circumstances that these colleagues have flown to Turkey to do what they can to get these people out of jail. But I'm delighted that Lorenzo Repetti, the head of policy at the ETUC, at short notice has accepted to make the keynote on Esther's behalf. So we'll listen to Lorenzo's keynote. Thankfully, also he can stay for the morning session. So then I will ask the panelists to come up. We'll have the panel session and have a round of questions addressing all the presentations. In the direction of the people online, you're welcome to write questions in the chat. In the course of the discussion, I will attempt at least to see some of the questions that are posed in the chat and also pose them to the speakers. So, Lorenzo, please, could I ask you to make your keynote now?
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, colleagues. It's very good to be here today. But first of all, indeed, want to start, as Andrew did, by apologizing from Esther for not being able to be present today. She would have very much liked to be here, and she had planned to do so. But indeed, she had to go to Turkey to support our Turkish brothers and sisters that are currently under attack, and that she had to do. But she wanted to pass me to pass on her behalf the thanks to the ETUI and to all the colleagues for organizing this important event. The discussion that we will be having today is both important and interesting, but also very timely, because housing is now very much at the center of the discussions at European level, something that just a few months or few years ago would have been difficult perhaps to foresee. And this is the result of efforts by many progressive actors, including several of them are here today also, by the progressive parties and movements, by also the trade union movement. And this is a first important result, of course, but then we may need to make sure that we use this opportunity to the best. And this is the result of a lot of us and a lot of our work. The ETUC manifesto for the European election already included the demand to the European institutions to ensure the full respect for the right to adequate, decent and affordable housing. And this was, in our view, a key pillar of the ETUC plan and the ETUC demands for a fair deal for workers. Because everywhere we have been meeting our members, meeting trade union reps, meeting working people, housing has come up over and over again as a key concern for workers all across Europe. There is a housing emergency in Europe that needs to be tackled as a matter of urgency. And this is also very much in line with the Eurobarometer findings that for people across Europe, one of the key concerns is the rising prices and the rising cost of living. And if we look at the data, I think the data tell a very clear history in this case. So rent in Europe from 2010 to 2024 rent prices have raised by 25% on average. And if we look at certain countries, that is even more staggering. So Estonia rent prices have raised by more than 200%, Lithuania by more than 170%, in Ireland by more than 100%, in Hungary by more than 100%. So this, and of course, this all while wages and incomes and pensions have not, of course, raised in the same way. So this is, in practice, a reduction of purchasing power for working people. And then I will look a bit into all the consequences of this. And then in addition to this, also house prices have increased. From 2010 to 2024, they have raised by more than 50% on average in Europe. And then if we look, what is the consequence for low-wage workers? In 14 member states today, minimum wage workers spend 35% or more of their pay on only housing, on only accommodation. In 3 member states, Netherlands, Ireland, and Luxembourg, minimum wage workers spend more than half of their wage on housing. So in these conditions, then how can they make ends meet? How can they get to the end of the month? And it's not only, and by the way, these are average. So it means that also take into consideration rural areas where, while we know that in big cities, the cost is even higher of housing, of rents, or house prices. And it's not just a problem of costs, even if the costs are staggering, it's also a problem of quality. And according to the data, 17% of Europeans today live in homes that do not offer adequate spaces for the household. So it's both a problem of prices and also a problem of quality of accommodation. And we will come to that. And all this while, as we know, wages and pensions and incomes have not raised in the same proportion at all. And the consequences are clear when we discuss, when we meet with the people across Europe, with working people, with our members. The consequences are that too many workers, in particular low-paid workers, spend an increasing part of their pay on rent and cannot make ends meet. That a lot of them have to sleep in their car, cannot afford accommodation, that they have to find accommodation very far from their place of work, so spend increasing time and increasing also financial resources on commuting, that they do have to live in very bad quality accommodations with their consequences for them, for their children. And of course, all this, and I know that colleagues from FEANZA will intervene also later, has a bigger consequences in terms of the fight against homelessness. And this without looking then at the condition of specific categories, let's say, of farm workers which live in informal settlements, of young people that can't leave their families, of old people that can't afford decent accommodation with their pensions. So this dealing with the housing emergency in Europe is a key element to deliver a fair deal for workers in the E2C point of view, is a key point to tackle the social justice emergency that Europe is today facing. And the social justice emergency, because while the picture is the one that I painted, or at least some of the elements help painting that picture, housing is also an area of staggering profits for few. Staggering profits for very wealthy individuals, staggering profits for investment funds, an area of incredible and unregulated yet speculation. So we have an area where there is exploitation and there is increasing crisis for working people to be able to afford their accommodation, but also increasing speculation and profits for investment funds, very wealthy individuals. And on top of that, now we are on the, let's say, with a very strong risk of austerity policies hitting European society again. And this would go absolutely in the opposite direction of what is needed to tackle this housing emergency. And in this situation, let's say, against this background, there were and there was the strong pressure in the European elections campaign for the European institutions to take action against this situation, to take action to ensure affordable and adequate housing from the E2C, but also from a lot of progressive parties, progressive movements. And also because of that, the Commission President, as you know, and this is one of the reasons we are here today, announced the first ever affordable housing plan, the first ever commissioner that would have amongst their tasks, and his tasks in this case, the task of housing, on affordable housing. And then some other commitments were taken by von der Leyen, including to deliver an investment platform for the affordable housing, to look into cohesion policy, into state aids, into how the Social Climate Fund, they can contribute to deliver more affordable housing. And this is, of course, a very important development that we as E2C have welcomed, but now we need to make sure that concrete proposals, concrete steps follow. And these steps, this proposal can bring an improvement to working people life, to people lives across Europe, and can contribute to resolve the housing emergency that Europe is today facing. The E2C has defined its position, now it's a couple of months ago, with the resolution on the right to adequate, decent and affordable housing. And what the European trade union movement has, let's say, put forward as demands is, first of all, the demand for a new approach to housing policy. So, and I would say two main pillars I would stress. One is that we need a human rights-based approach, because the right to adequate, decent and affordable housing is already enshrined in human rights instruments at European, at EU and international level. So this is the case, for example, at European level in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, even in the Pillar of Social Rights, at European level in the European Social Charter, and at international level in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, ILO in the Philadelphia Declaration. So we have a very strong human rights basis for our demand for affordable and decent housing. And the second pillar is finally to overcome this mantra of private before public that has created so many damages in the last years with the processes of privatization, liberalization, deregulation, financialisation of the housing market. And connected with that, of course, is the fact, the recognition that austerity policies are absolutely incompatible with the investment efforts that are needed to solve the housing emergency in Europe. And then to reply to the question that Andrew put before the start of our discussion, so what concrete actions are needed? Now, I will outline some of the elements, then I don't want also to take too much time at the start, because I see that there are also very, very important contributions afterwards, but just some of the elements that from an European trade union movement point of view must be part of the European approach to this European affordable housing plan. So the first element, but more of a method than content, is of course to make sure that this plan is developed in an inclusive manner. And for us, the role of social partners, of social dialogue, is of particular importance to make sure that social partners are involved in the definition of this European affordable housing plan. And then two elements that we want to stress, that the D2C stresses from the start, is the need for quality jobs for the plan to support the quality jobs. Because one part of the problem is, of course, that wages have not raised in the same manner as housing prices have. And so we need the EU to support collective bargaining, to support minimum wages to increase in order to take into account also the increased cost of housing, the increased cost on transport, and so on. And the second element in terms of quality jobs, and I will come to some other in particular with regard to public services, but the second element is quality jobs for the workers that are building those houses. And I know that Tom will make this point extensively, I think, but it's absurd that the workers that are building the houses that we need can't afford then to live and to find a decent and adequate accommodations for themselves. So we needed to have better working conditions, better wages for construction workers, to deal with abuses in the subcontracting chain and to have a legal initiative on that, but I want to get more into detail. I know that this will be part of the discussion. And then one element that has been completely absent until now for the, let's say, at least from the perspective of the Commission, is the issue of tackling speculation. Because if we only act on the level of investments, of course, that is necessary, but we also needed to find the resources and to tackle speculation. And to do that, we needed to increase the taxes on profits and wealth. We needed to disincentivize non-use or hoarding. We need stronger rules against on short-term rentals. That is very important as well. And of course, long-standing demand from the E2C, from the European Trade Union movement, is to have stronger rules and stronger measures against tax evasion and tax avoidance. And that is very important as well. But then we need to have, from the European level, stronger support to affordable, to non-for-profit, to the limited profit, to public and social affordable housing. And this is a very important element. So new constructions, of course, but also to support these specific housing models. And to do that, then we are faced with the constraints that the new economic governance rules have also put to member states. So we need the flexibility for member states to be able to put in place these investments through additional investments through at European level, through flexibility in the economic governance rules in the European semester, in the way in which the investments for adequate and affordable housing are taken into consideration by the European Commission. And we needed to make sure that funding for housing comes with the social conditionality attached, because they must ensure that quality jobs are created with those funding. We need also to make sure that residential construction projects include targets for non-for-profits, limited profit, social public housing. So this is as well a very important element. And then I'm already, I think, getting close to my time limit for today, but I will mention a couple of other elements. An element of great importance in our view is also to ensure that there are strong public services connected with accommodation, because we can't have housing and adequate housing without a network of high quality public services supporting them. And in order to do that, we needed to ensure that local authorities have sufficient power to regulate the housing market, but we need also to make sure that public service workers have good working conditions, quality jobs, and that we have enough investments in public services for them to be able to provide quality services. And I know that Pablo and EPSU will be making that point extensively later today. And two other elements I will mention before passing on to the issue of the review of the state aid rules is the issue of energy poverty, because that is also something that working people are over and over raising as a key concern. So to make sure that the increase in energy costs and the cost of energy efficiency is not passed on to the tenants, and to make sure that we finally introduce or promote a disconnections ban for those households that are struggling in paying their energy bills. And a final element that I will make in this perhaps too long list, but it's also useful to kick off the discussion, is the issue of quality standards for accommodation. Because we too often see that working people and people in Europe are forced to live in accommodations, also in the private market, that don't meet decent adequacy standards. And this has very bad consequences for also for the health of the families that live in those accommodations, for children. So this is another element that must be tackled. And finally, two additional points that I would like to make. One on the review of state aid rules. So this is one very important area of work at European level, is one of those where we can have a very direct impact if the rules are changed effectively. And we need here to ensure that the revision guarantees a stronger support for investments, stronger support for investment in not-for-profit, in limited profit, social and public housing. And the two key elements that can be done in this revision is to delete the restricted definition of social housing and its limitation to a target group. That would already be a very important step that the European Union can take to make sure that we start addressing this housing emergency that we have in front of us. And one element that I have and I wanted to mention as well, the resolution includes a strong support for the European Platform Against Homelessness and for the Lisbon Declaration. And we call and we stress the need for the European Union to take the actions that are necessary to eliminate homelessness. And I know that Giulio, that is the Confederal Secretary dealing with this, and also Ruth from SEANSA will be discussing this in the second panel today. So it will be a very interesting discussion. And I'm going on too long as usual. So dealing with this housing emergency is a key pillar for the ETUC, is a key area of work for the European institutions to ensure a fair deal for workers, to tackle the social justice emergency that Europe has in front of it today. So, colleagues, thanks very much again to ETUI. We look forward to the discussion, and thanks again. Thank you.
So thanks so much, Lorenzo, that very clear overview. We're fortunate that Lorenzo can stay till the end of the session, so I would ask the panelists now to come up, and we'll have a joint discussion of Lorenzo's points and the points raised by the panelists now afterwards. So please, Tom, Pablo, Sorsha. So thanks very much to all the panelists also for your time, for coming. And without further ado, I'll pass the floor to Tom. Um, please limit your remarks to 10 minutes, and we'll have almost half an hour at the end for a wide-ranging discussion. Please, Tom.
Yes, thank you, Andrew, and thank you for the invitation. I think Lorenzo already made a very good and very comprehensive overview of the many elements that are very important in this discussion. But of course, coming from the EFBWW, the European Federation of Building and Woodworkers, we are, of course, following all of this with particular great interest because there's a lot of issues that need to be taken into account. So I will not go into, let's say, the need for a change of paradigm in this whole discussion and actually moving away from looking at housing as an investment policy that needs to deliver a lot of money and profits towards a more social approach, of course. But I would like to focus, as you will understand, on the workers who need to build these homes. Well, we have a huge challenge. Already today, we are confronted in construction with huge labor shortages, and construction is seen everywhere as one of the key sectors to address almost all of the current societal challenges. Energy renovation of buildings. Buildings are responsible in Europe for more than 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a huge investment that needs to be done there. There's a huge number of workers that are needed to actually deliver the renovation wave, as it is called. Climate resilience of cities. Only a couple of weeks, what we saw in Valencia, and what we've seen in the last couple of years because of heavy storms, floodings, rising sea levels. So cities need to be adapted to that. All of this also will demand a lot of construction activity. The energy transition itself will need new infrastructure to bring renewable energies to homes and to companies and to industries. So let's say it's a good time for the construction sector. But as said, we have huge labor shortages, and we have, let's say, a bit the elephant in the room, that is how to address this and how to really make this one of the core issues in the discussion. Because we need to raise the issue of quality jobs of those workers. And we need to really be very frank and very straightforward in saying that also the same thing goes for the housing situation as such, but also in construction, the current business model is not working. We have business models in our industry which are based on cheap labor, ultra flexible labor, precarious labor, and exploitation of labor. We have fraudulent practices related to posting of workers. We have more and more what we see now, workers coming from outside of the EU, third country national workers, as we call them, entering into the EU, which are seen as the magic solution for the labor shortages. But these workers finding themselves in extremely precarious situations of exploitation, which are actually quite comparable to what we have seen in Qatar. We see the same business model developing with placement agencies, with labor intermediaries, bringing in these workers, and again, these workers being in extremely vulnerable situations. So, I mean, this is not the solution. So when we address the whole housing crisis, we also need to put this topic on the table. This needs to be an opportunity to actually put the issue of quality jobs on the agenda. And quality jobs means direct jobs. It means direct jobs which are covered by good collective agreements, good salaries, good social protection, good health and safety. Because indeed, as Lorenzo mentioned, we now have a situation where in many cases, workers that are building the homes, building the buildings, can no longer afford actually to live in them. So this is really something that we need to address. And we really need to be frank about this. Because yes, construction is in the picture for all of these discussions I already mentioned. But every time we meet the Commission, it's about skills. And it's about skill shortages. Of course, it's about skills, but it's about investing in workers to have and develop those skills. And that means also that you develop in their careers and that you develop and that you invest also in them having good salaries, good working conditions, and so on. And for some reason, this is not on the agenda. So this is extremely important that we link those discussions, that we link the issue of housing, building social housing, affordable housing. There's really a need to speed up investments there, but we need then to address the issue indeed of labor shortages. So we have a campaign on limiting subcontracting. We had yesterday a joint board meeting with FIEC, which represents the industry side, the company side in the building industry, and we actually agree together that we actually need indeed to limit subcontracting to, again, what is technically necessary and not because of the economic cost of things. And why I'm insisting so much on this also, and I will quote the mission letter from Ursula von der Leyen to the new commissioner. As part of the European Affordable Housing Plan, you will develop a European strategy for housing construction to support housing supply, and you will focus on measures to reduce building costs, increase the skills of the labor force, raise productivity, and enhance the environmental performance of construction. Again, where is in this quote, where are the workers? It's not about the workers, it's about having skills and skills shortages and so on. So really, we will have to insist on this. We are insisting on this. And as I said, we also have had a very good discussion yesterday with FIEC, the employer side, on this. And I come to my next point, which is public procurement. Because building social and affordable housing is usually done, and in most cases done with public money, taxpayers' money. We are preparing for the upcoming revision of the public procurement directives, and it's very clear we need to get rid of what we see as the lowest price option. So, of course, you understand immediately this goes very much against what Ursula von der Leyen wrote to Dan Jurgensen in her mission letter. But we need to address this. It's not about the lowest price, because the lowest price always comes at a huge social cost, as I already explained. So this will be extremely important to use the momentum also of the revision of the public procurement directives to actually make sure that that when taxpayers' money is spent, that it is spent in a good way, that it is not spent in a way that leads to exploitation of workers, that leads to precarious jobs. So this will be a very, very important topic for us. And actually, we're already preparing a joint position, again, with the employers in our industry to actually move forward on this point and to put also the social criteria, social clauses on top of the agenda in the revision of the public procurement directives. I'm really sorry, I'm not really taking note of the time, but I'm almost 2 minutes. Great. No, but I'm almost about to finalize. What we also find quite interesting in the portfolio of Dan Jurgensen is that housing is linked to energy. And as I mentioned in my introduction, badly insulated homes, badly insulated buildings represent almost 40% of greenhouse gas emissions in the EU. So it's really good to combine those elements in this portfolio. So we need to step up the renovation wave. But again, of course, this needs to be done in a good way, meaning also looking at workers' rights, decent jobs, quality jobs, and so on. But also, and this is also another elephant in the room, when we talk about renovation, we need to go for deep renovation, as we say it. we need to look at not, let's say, easy, quick fixes, which only look at the energy part, but also at removing the hazardous substances that are still present in many, many buildings. Not to mention, for example, asbestos. So we had a huge victory in the last commission period with a very ambitious revision of the asbestos at work directive. So of course, the next challenge is now to transpose this in the same ambitious way in national legislation. Our affiliates are extremely active on this, but we lack still a piece of legislation, and that is the monitoring, the screening of asbestos in building. There was a promise to come forward with the directive. It's long overdue, but we really also hope that also Dan Jurgensen can play a role in this. We know that it's part of another DG's responsibilities, but we are also aware that one of the reasons why it's blocked, that it is also blocked for political reasons at the highest level of the Commission. So we will need the progressive forces in the Commission to make sure that also there, this initiative will come forward. Because if we don't have that, we actually cannot take the profit from our victory, so to say, of this revised asbestos at work directive. Because it's a bit strange that we agree on better protecting workers against asbestos, but at the same time, we are not taking the necessary initiatives to know where the asbestos is in buildings and homes. And just maybe for those who are not following this discussion so closely, asbestos is not something from the past. Asbestos is present in millions and millions of buildings all over Europe. At some stage in history, it was considered as the magic solution for everything. So it is in many, many, many buildings, many, many homes present. So when we talk about renovating the building stock, when we talk about affordable and social housing and speeding up investments in that, we also need to address this. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks so much, Tom. Excellent presentation and for keeping to the time. Please, Pablo.
Thank you. First, thank you for the invite. I have to apologize for my general secretary who had to run to Turkey because a member of our executive committee got arrested at this weekend, the week before he got a 5-year Schengen visa. But then the Turkish authorities decided to put him in jail for unknown reasons. So he had to be here, and basically I'm stepping into his shoes. So, well, Tom, and that was to be expected, actually marched into some of the points I wanted to raise, but no problem. So we'll echo ourselves. I want to take the question we were asked if we were on the right track. Well, I mean, it's always kind of a philosophical question. In the right track for what? We're in the wonderful track to basically not getting anything at the end of all this process. Because, as Tom was mentioning, on the one hand, we have had several announcements about the need of dealing with housing. If you would be very cynical, you just would believe that it was done just before the vote of the Commission President candidate. So the Greens and some left and some Social Democrats would vote for her. And then she kind of conveniently ignore after. And what we have seen in the leaked documents that I have seen, basically the Commission is saying that these are not a problem. I mean, Lorenzo was making an endless amount of data. I'm not going to repeat, and everyone knows what we're basically tackling or trying to tackle at the European level. And what we're going to do is going to pour more money in the market, because that always works. And by the way, it's not been the reason of the crisis that just pouring more money in the market to see if developers would actually buy affordable housing, which are defining what is affordable. So let's keep trying again and again and again and again. Like the clock that is stuck and twice a day says the right time. And that is very problematic, because either the Commission changes its perception of things, or it won't be able to tackle the housing crisis. And two issues are, well, for us, are should make all alarm bells go wild. One is the Draghi report, which is basically repeating the mantra of administrative burden, red tape, cut anything that has to do with the public sector or public services because it's not competitive. And on the other hand, as Tom was saying, the Public Procurement Directive. Now, it would be relatively simple for the Commission to actually set the ground to make these a priority for all member states, and those that actually want to do something, they could have their tools and the means. I mean, again, if you're very cynical, you could think that the announcement of the Spanish Prime Minister last weekend in the Congress of the Party of creating a public company that would actually put all the tools of the Spanish state to actually develop houses is, it's actually clearly, as an announcement, a step in the right direction, because there are no 20 ways to actually control the prices of a market, like the housing market. You need to increase a stock of cheap housing that people can afford. That is what needs to be done. And the proof of the pudding is those cities that actually have that, the price is controlled and there is less problems and more affordable housing. Affordable meaning that people don't spend a huge amount of their income. Now, it's quite interesting because the Spanish government in the announcement, and I'm focusing on Spain because, I'm from there, so I know something about it, was actually putting as an example the Basque Country, which has a public company, and Barcelona, who has actually done a big effort to increase the housing, the public or non-for-profit or limited profit or cooperative stock. Now, the issue is that, let's take Barcelona as a city that people know. There's been a push against short-term rentals. It's very dense. It's difficult to buy new. So the policy has been buying, building as much as they can, and then trying to basically redo things, captation. So in 8 years, the public, non-for-profit and so on, stock of the city of Barcelona has gone from 7,500 dwellings to 11,500 dwellings, which is almost doubling it. Now, the issue is that it has 750,000. So you cannot have a meaningful public policy only covering 4, 5, 6% of the population, because you're really only managing, if you're lucky, to tackle homelessness, which is a good objective in itself. But when you are able to have public policy or public sector policy over 3, 4, 5% of the total of society, you can have an impact. In the same way that if you had one hospital for the entire Belgium, you won't be able to tackle a public health crisis. And the real issue here is that the Commission has refused to have a strategy for public services over the since the treaties were started to be signed. There's no protocol for public services. There is no clause on public investment. Everything is to try to convince the markets to be nicer, try to convince the markets to invest in a better way, trying to convince the market, etc., etc. It would take, as Tom was saying, to make the lowest bid clause in the procurement directive not the main one, and make the social clauses mandatory. That would be it. It would be very simple in the revision. The revision is being open in a few weeks, we are told. And, they could actually have a question in the call for evidence saying, do you think this is a good idea? Without that this will happen, although Séjourné in the replies was, for a French liberal, pretty cool, but that's not enough. And that is what worries us. That on the one hand, we have this need of 100 billion, to actually make our societies more competitive. But what do they mean? How do you make more competitive in the terms of housing? How do you make more competitive public health? How do you make more competitive daycares? How do you make more competitive the basically core public services? So we need to make those social clauses mandatory. They, because we'll be asking forever to do that. And we will campaign and we will do, but it would be actually simple for the Commission to do something meaningful and not just launch another PR campaign about people should live in cooperatives, which is one of the points they're actually proposing. Because those that can or want to, they already try, but there is quite a few people that don't have the means because they're actually low pay or on a short-term contract or and so on and so forth. So in that sense, not to end in a grim note, well, it's actually very grim, but linked to the building, and I'll just finish with that. I just spent 2 days with our good old friends of the Fire Brigades Union in the UK, and we basically have been discussing the Grenfell inquiry. For those that don't know, remember, there was a 23-story building in North Kensington, so in London, that basically burned, and there were like over 100 people killed, and the entire building was destroyed. Now, if you look at what happened there, is that basically there was absolutely no regulation on how you would basically do energy efficient building. So basically, a building that was actually designed with fire safety in mind, not to burn in the way they actually did. It was covered in petrol, which is what cladding is. So yes, it was consuming less energy. But then when there was an incident, the entire thing burned down. And it was linked to the very policy that today we are being confronted as the solution for our problems, i.e. deregulation, the famous one in, one out, the cutting of red tape, the self-certification, the standards. So we need the European Commission to acknowledge that we need more tax inspectors and labor inspectors and people to control the posting of workers directive, which is usually labor inspectors, but not just that, and so on and so forth. So we need to reinforce meaningfully the public services, and that doesn't go through the mechanism that the Commission usually does, which is pumping money into the market. We saw it with the Juncker plan and the multipliers. I'm still waiting to see the impact. We see it with the Next Generation EU. We see it with every single Commission proposal is just to give more public money, and I'll finish with this sentence, more public money to those that already have a lot of money and pay very little taxes. So either this logic changes or this plan will be yet another failure that is big media, big intentions, but nothing concrete for working people, and certainly not for public sector workers. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Pablo, also for keeping to the time. So, Sasha Edwards, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you here this morning. I would I think that last point that Pablo made is a crucial one for all of us to get behind. So a big part of the plan coming up is increased investment and increased innovation in construction. So lack of investment or lack of innovation in construction are definitely not two of the factors that have brought us to the housing crisis we see today. So we've had the wrong type of investment in housing, extractive investment, and too much of it. So profit-seeking investment. However, I do think that both of those, so innovation in construction and investment, are definitely two of the factors, if we get them right, that can potentially get us out and onto the right track. So it's, I think there's a lot to play for now, and I think we have an opportunity to band together. So first of all, thanks a lot. I think I've seen a lot of some familiar colleagues who've been working on this issue for, sorry to say, but decades in Brussels. So Michele Kauer led the urban partnership on housing. We worked over 2.5 years to put a strategy together, going back 2-3 years now. Obviously, colleagues from FEANSA, we worked together also the last decades, working on out-of-the-box solution, trying to tackle housing exclusion. And I suppose we feel a little bit like at sort of at COP29, like the scientific community, that we know what's wrong. We know where the emissions are coming from. We know what the problems are, and we feel we have the solutions. So obviously we're going to be really pushing now those solutions that we've been preparing. We are ready, we have the solutions in place, and we want to push those forward as really as hard as we can over the next weeks, months. I think this is an opportunity. And I must admit, in a way, this is a really overdue development, because we haven't worked a lot from the partnership perspective, but also from the broader housing community. We haven't worked a lot actually with the trade unions at European level. I know a lot of our members, so public housing providers, would obviously, many of them have even been formed by trade unions, but at EU level, we haven't done that enough. So I think thanks to Pablo for reaching out earlier on, and to E2UI and ETO. We met with Esther Lynch for a breakfast, not a lunch, recently. And it's a sort of an overdue development. And if we can really get behind the same broad messages, I think we've heard this morning from ETUC, I think we can definitely get behind those messages and the ones that have been outlined by colleagues today. I think we have the potential, we have the ideas, we just have to try to get them on track. And I think also what is crucial, I was recently on a call between the Slovenian Housing Fund, so it's a fund that's been put in place and quite radically ramping up investment in public rental housing in Slovenia. In a call with the experts from the Austrian system, as we know, very well established system made up municipal housing, but also strong limited profit housing cooperatives. And in Slovenia, they were asking, look, that was 100 years ago. We're in a different place now. We can't. Who wants to be a limited profit now? Where we only have to deal with the private developers. And so what was pointed out was it wasn't a case of convincing a private developer 100 years ago to become a limited profit housing provider. No, it was actually a societal movement with trade unions behind it, also with business, so with industry behind it, and with the society behind it. And I think that's what we're missing now. What we risk is of having a very technocratic approach. Okay, let's try and establish, some cooperatives or something. However, what we need is this we need, unions on board, but also business on board, all those stakeholders that can make a difference on board, and trying to sing from the same hymn sheet, because that's going to be that's going to be the challenge here, to sing from the same hymn sheet, to try to push in the same direction. Because what we are seeing now, we're going to have a new committee in the European Parliament, so a special committee that's been confirmed. So similar to a COVID committee, and there was also a committee focused on cancer. So now we will have one on housing. But we will also have an intergroup, most probably dedicated to urban and housing. But I suppose the issue will be that you will have a lot of different members of the parliament, not a lot of background on housing, most of them. There's a very minimal amount who actually have worked on housing at national level, coming with different prognosis on what the cause of the housing crisis is. So they will be saying, okay, it's the green agenda, it's migration, and different ideas on what the solutions should be. So I think it is even more vital for us to be ready with the evidence-based, so from the scientific housing community, coming with evidence-based approaches to what the solutions can be. And not to take too long, but I think from the Housing Europe perspective, obviously we are constantly putting together the data on the housing crisis. And just this morning, I asked my colleagues from the Observatory a few points. So from the Teachers Union of Ireland, So 85% of teachers saying very difficult to find. Aware of colleagues who have ceased employment at the school due to the accommodation crisis. 35% aware of the crisis having an impact on the students themselves. And 99% saying it will be difficult to secure new accommodation in their locality. So we are constantly sort of gathering the same data that we heard at the kickoff of today. However, it's sort of difficult for us to stay very negative, because at the same time we are constantly gathering really progressive examples of what's going on out there. We're doing that at the moment together with the International Union of Tenants. So they're not here today, and I believe they have to be a leader, a thought leader in for the affordable housing plan. It's very much, if we don't have tenants' rights as the basis of our housing systems, we can't really have strong housing systems. And indeed, they have a lot of excellent reports and advice and toolkits on how member states could push that agenda, which could be shared also at European level. But what we are working with at IUT every 2 years is gathering those excellent examples. And actually, we have in Europe 43,000 local public cooperative social housing providers, many of whom are active for decades and even over a century, but are still active. They're building over 200,000 homes every year, renovating an equivalent amount, investing 50 billion euro in the sector every year. And basically, we just don't see why we can't do more like that. Why can't we have at least 20% in all member states of a responsible housing sector, a critical mass of housing that is going to take their responsibility to people and the planet, and obviously responsibility to decent working conditions along their entire building chain, because they're publicly accountable organizations. Why can't we simply make sure that we have the conditions so they can expand their work? And when I say their work, they have a holistic approach, because they need to, because they're at local level. They see the needs in terms of dignity and aging at home, in terms of addressing also health when they address housing, in terms of addressing inclusion when they look at housing, sustainable mobility. So they have to have this holistic approach if they want to stay active. They have to also maintain affordability, maintain energy efficiency if they want the rents also to be paid, you know. So they have this, the way they are designed, their raison d'etre is to have a holistic approach and a responsible approach to housing. Also the way they are regulated, the way they have been set up. So our simple ask to Jurgensen will be to make sure we don't have legislation coming through from European level that's going to make their job more easy, and that we figure out how can we reinforce and expand the responsible housing sector in countries where it exists, and how can we make it grow in countries where it doesn't. So that's what we're calling the new paradigm. We want that responsible housing to be the backbone of housing systems, as opposed to brought in just to clean up a problem when the market hasn't worked. And so it's quite a simple ask. But as often in Brussels, everything becomes complicated, because we have to scan across all the legislation from Basel III, you know, covering banking, collateral, from CSRD, corporate responsible reporting requirements. We have to look, obviously, state aid rules that was mentioned. We have to look across the entire spectrum of all of the DGs to see whether the legislation is actually going to support. And very often we find ourselves having to explain again and again and again why, the CSRD is actually not going to, or a green taxonomy is not going to promote a responsible housing sector, because there's not enough awareness. So what we're hoping as well is that this task force that's going to be put in place, supposedly in the first 100 days, we will at least have this a type of coherence and a whole government approach towards a right to housing based approach, towards a decent housing for all approach, but at least across the Commission DGs. So this is what we're hoping in the first 100 days. And then obviously the 3 pillars of the plan, 2 minutes. So the 3 pillars of the plan. So the first one is going to be the construction sector. So this is indeed where the points that Tom has brought up are going to be crucial. We also see huge pressure to deliver housing differently because of obviously our climate goals. We see a reduction in the possibility to develop sort of greenfield sites. We're thinking more sort of conversion of existing building, renovation of existing building, filled in empty spaces, building on top of existing building. It's a complex way to deliver housing, but we are seeing excellent examples of that. We're seeing also in those countries where we have a strong sector already, so €8,000 per building less cost because of reuse of materials. So when you start to have the structure in place to facilitate reuse of construction materials, circularity, you can eventually reduce costs, but obviously we're a long way from that in many parts. We're seeing also development along the bulk purchasing to speed up through hybrid and industrial methods. Obviously, it's probably something that Tom's looking very closely at as well. But we're seeing the aggregation potential of the public housing sector, so across a region. So housing providers coming together and jointly purchasing to build up the scale. So we had worrying comments from the EIB saying the sector is too small sort of to deal with the targets they're going to have for the next 5 years. Very worrying, because what we see is that we are the biggest sector, and obviously when aggregated, we have a huge potential to scale up innovation in a responsible way. So we're hoping that message doesn't get lost, and we're hoping maybe also the trade unions can support us there. So that will be the first pillar. The second pillar will be and this is one we've covered, Pablo's covered extensively as well. It will be the finance pillar, so the Pan-European Investment Platform. So there, that's the EIB will present the findings of 4 workshops already at the beginning of March next year. They will be putting together this investment tool, bringing in structural funds. So there's already a commitment to add 7 billion to ERDF, even in this period, to the finance available for ERDF for new construction and renovation. Obviously, a drop in the ocean, but if it's used well, can make a difference. And what will be crucial there will be the conditionality and what rules are attached. And the third pillar will be the whole society approach. And this, of course, we hope to see a strong reinforcement of the work of EPOC, and that Ruth will talk about later on. So all of the work on housing and tackling housing exclusion that has been developed under EPOC and linked to the social pillar. So yeah, we will be following those 3 pillars, trying to bring our quite simple message home. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you also, Sosha. Thanks to all the panelists for keeping to the time and making clear presentations and very meaty presentations. So I'm now opening the floor for discussion. We have about 25 minutes. It's the usual rules. You need to briefly state who you are. And Maria's got the microphones there. You need to speak in the microphone. Briefly state who you are. I prefer questions to statements. You can also make statements, but if they're statements, please make sure they're not the same length as the speeches we've had. Okay, thank you very much. So please, who would like to take the floor? So I don't know everybody's name, so take. Maybe we do left and right first of all. Here, Michael. Maybe we take Sue. I can see the gentleman with his hand up. Maybe we take these 3, and then we go to the right-hand side of the.
I'll stand up. My voice is also a little bit bad at the moment because I think this week we have like 10 events on housing. My name is Michaela Kauer. I'm coming from Vienna. And by nature, coming from Vienna, you're a specialist on social and affordable housing, I would say. And it's lovely that you mentioned Vienna so many times, of course, and the work we've been also trying to do to upscale the Vienna model of social and affordable housing to the EU level. And the fact that we are standing here today and talking with trade unions is, of course, and your institute is, of course, and not by coincidence. I think it has always been important for especially Vienna and our mayors to reach out to all the social partners. And this is also something that our mayor recently did when he invited to a high-level European stakeholder dialogue in Vienna. And in fact, we were putting all the demands on the table ahead of the European elections, the ones of IoT and Housing Europe and the many cities. Eurocities is here. I don't know where is Solène. Yeah. So CMR, the Economic and Social Committee of the Regions. There's a lot of people out there working on this, as Sorcha said, since many years. I'd say that the most important things, and this was highlighted also to Ursula von der Leyen and the President of the European Parliament, that we have to look at this affordable housing plan now from the perspective what is missing. There's a lot in it which we are fine. We're thinking there's a few traps, we shouldn't fall into them, but there's also a few things that are clearly missing. And one is, and it's also the elephant in the room, it's governance. It's good governance and housing. And this is in fact what we really need on European, national and regional and even local level. And where we can also try to identify better solutions with regard to how do we embed a good housing policy into the local building code, into the local zoning laws, into the local, legal, low threshold legal disputes, settlement institutions. How do we inform people about their rights as tenants? How do we protect them from being evicted? All of that. So there's a lot out there which is about good governance, and that would also open us a little bit the room to discuss the conditionalities. Yeah, we don't need new definitions on housing on EU level. That's the one point that I really want to make. This is now very much in the discussion. We don't need a definition of the European Investment Bank. There are definitions and they have rules in place to do housing, social and affordable housing since many years. What we really need is to say a good housing policy serves people, the planet, and the real economy. And this is something where I want to come to Pablo. That's my last remark. We have to be sure and have to strengthen Dan Jurgensen in his negotiations with DG ECFIN. Because they are not having in mind, obviously, when they talk housing, the real economy and the purchase power of people that comes with affordable housing. Yeah? But they have in mind the real estate economy, and that is only a small part. And I'm not sure if we should address that so much, because they have been the cause of the problem and not the solution. Never, ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you pass to Sue Bird with the red jacket, I think, wanted whatever order.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Sue Bird, and I'm a consultant here. I'm European Public Affairs Specialist on the basis of having previously had 30 years experience with the European Commission. And in fact, just before I left the Commission, I had a number of years with DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. So it's just one or two points I'd like to pick up from the discussion this morning. First of all, gentleman on the right-hand side there talked about the lack of, if I understood correctly, the lack of taking account of social employment, working conditions, living wages. You referred to the sector being a little bit too flexible and seemed to imply that the European Commission in previous time, the European Commission today was not focusing on those issues sufficiently. Well, I mean, let's see. We're with a new Commission now, and clearly the political climate in Brussels is moving rightward. So there's a case to be made for sure. But I think you're a bit dismissive about what's been achieved in the past already in terms of, and you referred to skills. And I was working in the skills team previously. You referred to the fact you felt that the Commission was, you went to engage with the Commission and all it was about was skills. Well, I mean, in DG Employment, I worked alongside in a unit on skills, working alongside units working on working conditions, wages, we were in the same department, so we had to coordinate. So I would take up that point with you, if I may. And then my second point concerns affordability. Yes, affordability of public housing. But How about affordability at a higher level of extraction, affordability at government level, affordability EU level? You referred to the cost of, you referred to asbestos remediation. We've thought about cladding remediation. How about energy performance and all the investment that's going to be required in energy performance, notwithstanding all the social housing that's being called for? Where's that going to be? Who's going to pay for that? Well, all right, big question. In the UK, for instance, I know that as far as the cladding issue is concerned, by legislation, the developers have to remediate. So I think the lady from Housing Europe started to come up with a few solutions. 1 minute. A few solutions. That's good. Let's continue today to look at solutions rather than maybe just looking at the problems, if we may. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So please, yeah.
Try and be rapid. My name's Richard Tufts, Friends of Smart Specialisation. First of all, housing isn't a new problem. I was involved in a housing action group as a town planner in the 1970s. So, housing problems have been a long time. I'd like to put probably two stones in the pond, if you like. The first one is, I think that it's not a housing problem, it's a planning problem. If you go to Limoges, you can buy a house for 100,000 euros. And if you're lucky, you can sell your house in 1 year. So basically, it's not just housing, it's planning that we need to look at. Because the housing crisis is in metropolitan areas. It's not in small cities. Second point is that housing should not be a commission issue. I don't understand why housing is at the European level. Housing is a local competence. It's a local competence in terms of design, in standards, architecture, and Brussels should be designing and building its own houses. It shouldn't be engaged, because where will the money come from? Sue has made a good point. It will come from cohesion policy. And cohesion policy should be about growth and resilience. And as soon as we open cohesion policies to housing, you will get a social security system in cohesion.
Thank you very much to this point. So I'm going to take two remarks I've seen on the chat, because the people online, and then I'm not, even though you're further away, I'm not neglecting the right hand side of the room. I will have a second round. Okay. So to be very brief, two questions from the chat. One is about the role of financialisation. This was mentioned by some of the speakers. So maybe the question to those of you, maybe to Lorenzo or those who would like to take this up, what is the role of financialisation and investment funds? Could you be a little bit more specific about that? Then there was another question, which unfortunately I have actually managed to delete. So it was a lady, if I'm not wrong, from the Parliament, but I do remember the essence of her question, which was regarding indeed this committee that's been set up in the Parliament. If I understood right, there's some concern, maybe this is a question for social, maybe for others, that it's been taken out of employment and set up as a special committee, whether there may be some concerns about that. So maybe we go in the reverse order of the speakers and have a first round. Again, please try and be a little bit concise, and then I promise I will go to the other side of the room and take the questions from that side. Thank you. So, Saoirse, that would be you first then.
Sorry, which ones would you like me to address?
You can pick.
So obviously the question of financialization, I mean, we see the main buffer against financialization is obviously, and indeed the point was just made, planning. This is obviously a local issue. The challenge is going to be at European level to see where can we improve the EU approach, make it more coherent, because there are absolutely indirect impact of quite a lot of the EU legislation. And the issue is that there's no coherence. So we have, Energy Performance Building Directive, and we have, let's say, state aid rules. We have, as I mentioned, banking rules, CSRD, and obviously we are the first ones to say housing is a local issue and a national competence. However, there are quite a lot of indirect impact of the legislation coming through, and we don't really have an overview. So therefore we do see it as very positive to hopefully have at least that overview and somebody that we can refer to here in Brussels. So I think no denying the point that's been made. And on the financing side, so yes, there's huge financing is going to be needed. We have also some excellent financing schemes, revolving schemes that actually have actually extensive use of private finance, but then used in a publicly regulated fashion. So some of our most largest housing systems are actually financed in that way. So again, it's not what the EU can put forward is going to be a drop in the ocean of what investment is needed in housing. However, we do have good schemes, and finance is the rhythm of the finance is determining the housing. So the housing is dancing to the beat of the drum of finance in a way. The problem is, as was clearly said by Pablo, we haven't, and Michaela, it hasn't been a lack of finance over the last decade. It's been too much finance and been put into the sector in an unregulated way. So it's about just stepping in, using the public interest to regulate the inflows into the sector so that they stay in the sector and in a way that's generating value for society. And we know how to do that. But it's a case of having the bravery at local level, bravery and coherence and let's say collaboration between the local, national and European level, so that we can indeed channel more finance from European level, but then obviously it will be up to the local level to make sure we use that finance in a way that is generating impact, generating value for society, social and environmental value. We know how to do it, and we just have to focus on that. And I think financialisation, I mean, the best way to buffer against that is indeed having those local regulations in place, having proper rights of tenants in place, having sufficient critical mass of public cooperative social housing, having the right planning rules. So that's the buffer. The problem is we've had taken our eyes off the wheel in many constituencies, many member states, and we've hoped that just the market alone will deliver the housing that we need for a functioning society. Hasn't worked out like that in many cases. So it's about stepping back in there and having active policies. And then
social.
Yeah, sorry. Finish up there. Yes, maybe just on the last point on data, indeed, that it's only in the metropolitan region. And I think it's a very good point. We have very different contexts when it comes to the housing crisis. We have very many areas that indeed are shrinking, and we have huge amount of empty housing in some constituencies. So again, it's a case by case scenario, but what we basically have is a situation that in many cases where the jobs are, where the mobility is, where the opportunities are, we have a mismatch of supply, and I think we're going to lose out as a continent if we don't step in and address that.
Great. Thanks, Sasha.
Yeah, jumping on it is actually not a metropolitan problem. It's a problem of public policy. I come from a country where there are cities that are empty. They were created 10, 15 years ago. Thousands of people should be living there, and there is like maybe tens around Madrid, around Toledo. You just go find them. What there isn't there is any jobs, any day centers, any care centers, any hospitals, or anything you might actually want to live there for. So we're back in the 60s, really, with nicer houses, perhaps, and sometimes with swimming pool. But you don't want to live there because the cost, and we saw it when the inflation crisis, people were like desperate not to take the car because half of the wages were going into this. So, yeah, I agree with Mikhail. I mean, governance, the thing is when there is no governance in public policy, the governance is made by our good old friend, the invisible hand of the market. And given that this has been created by, there is no European competence here, but the national markets, we have actually seen liberalization of the housing markets in many countries and privatization of the housing stock in some other countries. So there is a very clear responsible, which is very many governments who have privatized and actually kind of just thrown thousands of construction workers into these contractors, because they used to be actually doing renovation, which you could actually plan. So here we should talk about public policy and planning. And just a final comment, so I'll be short. What the Commission is now proposing is a change on how cohesion funds are going to be distributed. And they're looking into, and they are merging cohesion with the unit that actually delivered the money for the COVID, which is giving it to the member states, less to the cities. So those that have actually liberalized, privatized, sold their housing stock are going to get the dosh. Who are they going to give it to? And we saw it with the COVID. The number of the tenderees that won contracts were like very few. I mean, 80% of all the money that went to the Next Generation EU went to the companies of the Spanish FTSE 100. In Spain is IBEX 35. 80% of the money. The same goes for Italy. So this is the issue. And by the way, the Commissioner for Cohesion is an Italian whose prime minister, when she got into the job, she said, let the businessman do their job. That is the logic that there is. So what we really need, is to build upon the things that we are seeing, 150,000 people in the streets of Barcelona saying, we are going to do a rent strike. Again, these are measures of the 1920s, but we need to really bring those voices into Brussels to actually break this. And yes, support the commissioner, but also we need to get like something in return. And if, just one final sentence, if there is something that could actually change and help cities and regions, is to stop budgetary cuts, to stop austerity so they can invest. You tell me, how do you do a public policy for housing when you have to keep cutting your budget?
Thanks, Pablo. Just before Tom, can somebody get a microphone to Lorenzo, please, so he can answer? Oh, you have one already. Okay, perfect. Tom.
Yeah, just to maybe reply to the comments made by the lady that formerly was working for the Commission. Yes, of course, that's what I was saying. It's very much about skills, but it's only about skills. That's the whole thing. And it seems that the entire attention goes to having skilled workers, but not about paying them correctly and about offering them a direct quality job, a good contract with good social protection. That's the whole issue. It's only about skills, as if this is something up in the air. We will find somewhere, somehow, and we will put those skills on him, mostly him still in our sectors, or her. But nobody wants to discuss the quality of job. And so that's for us the huge frustration that we have. There was recently the European Labour Authority published a report, and the title was How to Deal with Surplus and Shortages of Skills in Europe. That really pisses us off. Sorry for this language. I mean, we're talking about people. So we really need to invest in people. And this is a message to the companies. Companies need to invest in skills of their workers, and that means offering them a direct job again. And that's also the whole issue with subcontracting. Today, all the big construction companies, they see themselves as project managers. They take a project, mostly publicly funded, and then the immediate thing they do is subcontract and outsource. And they don't care about skills, to be honest. They care about the cheapest. And I very much agree what Sorja said. It should be about innovation in construction. We very much support this. However, a sector that is addicted to cheap labor, all economic studies show that cheap labor is the biggest hurdle for innovation. So we really need to, and we very much support this also together. And I also want to underline this, together with the honest companies, with the good construction companies. Together, we need to rebuild our sector. And a last comment I want to make. Yes, probably we see this, of course, the political wind in Europe is turning to the right. But the issue we have in our sector is an issue of the last 30 years, is an issue of deregulation of the labor markets. It's an issue of focusing from the Commission side on the free movement of companies and seeing all the time hurdles, burdens, and burdens then being good contracts, being protective measures for these companies. Let's not forget that construction is a fraud-sensitive industry. And that's why 30 years ago, in many countries in the EU, there was very, very strict regulation on construction, on how to deal with agencies. In many countries, agencies were banned in construction. Many times, because of the pressure of the Commission, all of these regulations have been loosened, have been weakened, and today we see the problems. And this is really something we need to confront. We need to find an answer. Otherwise, we will not, as a construction sector, be able to live up to all the expectations which rightfully are put on the construction sector. And having said that, again, this is also what we're discussing in our sectoral social dialogue with FIEC that represents the construction industry. And many times we have very good, very strong joint positions towards the Commission to actually say to the Commission that many policies of the last 30 years have been wrong. We need to really adjust this and change this.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Lorenzo, please.
Yeah, now there is. Thanks for the interventions. It's very interesting discussion, and not to repeat too much what the colleagues have said, but indeed a couple of points I want also to pick up from the questions that were raised. And the one is I completely agree with the Sosha that on the issue of national versus local competencies, national local competencies versus European ones, a lot of European policies are already having a very big effect on housing. And I think Pablo, but also Tom mentioned, amongst others, economic governance, public procurement directives. So there are already a lot of areas where Europe is playing a role, and unfortunately in a lot of cases has played the role which was going not in the right direction. So now we need to use this window of opportunity that is opened to try to spin the ship in a different direction. And we have the window of opportunity of the public procurement directives. We have the window of opportunity of this affordable housing plan that we need to push also into get flexibility for the member states that do want to do the good thing, and to get that flexibility as much as possible into the semester to the extent that we can with the economic governance rules that we oppose but are in place, and in the revision of the state aid rules to make sure that also there is the possibility for the member states that want to do the right thing to do that. And in connection to that, in particular on the part of financing, I also want to pick up one element that Pablo raised, because also the new MFF will be a big battle in this area. And a lot of the rumors that we are hearing are very worrying for us. And we can't on one side say we need more investments in housing and then giving a blank check to member states to use money as they want without the objectives and the indications that are needed to develop adequate, affordable housing. And so this is one element. And in that also the issue that was discussed of social conditionalities. As you know, as trade unions, for us that is 100% key in this. And I would like also to pick up again what Sosha said in terms of financialization. There we have a number of antidotes that need to be supported and put in place by the European Union. One element is to reinforce the role of the public, because that will help public in its different declinations, the role of local authorities, the role of public authorities, but also to make sure that we do support in European policy also the non-for-profit, limited profit, public social housing compared to the private. And finally, in that also taxation play an important, very, very important role, because we can't continue to have a situation in which profits are taxed in such a limited manner compared to labor. And one final point I want to make with regard to the skills discussion, and very much in line with what Tom has said, we need to let a bit also reality enter through the window into this sometimes bubble discussion that we have, because we have had 1 year of skills, and the result of that is that the increase in training opportunities for working people has been very, very limited. It's really not made a difference. So now what we need, if we want to be serious about skills, is the right to training during working time without costs for working people. But then when we speak about shortages, it's the working conditions, because the sectors that have biggest shortages are the ones that in average pay 9% less workers. So we needed to pay them more, as some people have said rightly so. You need just to pay them more and to give better conditions and to give better salaries. So, and this is talking about people, as Tom was saying, and this is also, and I want to try to end with picking up also something that Pablo was saying. We talk about competitiveness a lot in these days, but what competitiveness can we have if we don't have the money to invest in our social and physical infrastructure? If we have cities that are without public services, if we have workers that don't have housing opportunities affordable close to their workplaces, if we don't have education of high quality with the public servants paid well and with quality jobs. So this is also a key pillar for having competitiveness. And the competitiveness in Europe cannot be built on low salaries and compression of too long. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Lorenzo. So I did so we're now in the coffee break. I apologize. We can eat a little bit into the coffee break, but not too much. So I did promise to take questions from the right-hand side of the room, which I will do, but I have to insist on like 30-second maximum. Please, the gentleman here and the gentleman behind him, and I'll take you, sir, as well. And these three, please be very short. And then we'll have a last round. Can you make a concluding statement? I'm very sorry. You have to go. Yeah, you have to leave. Okay.
Okay. Working. Very short. My name is Frank. I work at Counterbalance. We are a NGO working on European public investment, mostly the EIB. We've been looking a bit at housing, but we're not specialists like you here today. But though, since I have to be so quick, just this question, like, I have from my the small view I have on this, I think it seems to me that EIB does at least some good things, or has been doing some good things. But with this investment platform, and also the way that Commission and both also EIB talks about this, about involving a lot the private sector, which is also in their new strategic roadmap, I think it's quite it's also a bit concerning, and that we need some work together and positioning on this, on what kind of financing and what kind of limits that are needed. I don't claim to be the specialist on this, but I think it's important to make some strong positions on this as civil society and labor unions on this, to make sure that this money goes in the right direction.
I can directly answer that.
And I would be very interested to have your views and know if you are already engaging. I am sure some of you are already engaging with them, but thank you.
Well, I know you have to leave, but I'd like to get to it, because it shouldn't take more than a minute. Can you ask your question on this gentleman here, and then you give the floor to Sosha, because she has to leave.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Ruben Sansom. I work for SGI Europe, representing Service of General Interest and Public Services. My question is about public procurement. I mean, Tom and Pablo, you both touched upon that a little bit, and how we need to move away from basing procurement always on the lowest price option. And I'd like to connect that a little bit to some of the things that Lorenzo said before, about giving local authorities sufficient power to regulate the housing market. And of course, public procurement is an important part of the way in which they can do that. And I think my point is that, yes, local authorities can play an important part in doing that. And yes, it is important that public procurement moves away from being guided by the lowest price option alone. But frankly, this is putting quite a lot of pressure as well on local authorities to deal with what will become much more complicated public procurement rules when they involve both green and social conditionalities, and B, direct an extremely complicated market and within which housing is. So my question is essentially, how do we equip public authorities with the sufficient resources and tools to do so? I mean, they do great work, but we can't really chuck all these responsibilities on them without providing sufficient support. And I think the risk is, if we don't, like if I look at my membership working on public procurement now, is that they're just going to oppose any kind of conditionalities like this because they say, well, it's too much, we can't deal with it. Which would be a shame, because it's not a question of vision. It's not because they think that social conditionalities are a bad idea, but because they simply think that it's too much work, that they don't have the capacity to work on it.
Thanks very much. So the gentleman in the second row in the aisle, and then we'll give the floor to Sosha and the other panelists for a quick last round.
Thank you very much. I'm Gordon Bosanac. I'm newly elected MEP from Croatia, from Greens. Unfortunately, don't have time to give you the update what's going on in the parliament around the committee, etc., because many things are happening. But to the very concrete question, what is your attitude? We were talking about the financing from the cohesion fund, and everyone is speaking about ERDF, but no one wants to talk also about the cohesion fund, which now explicitly forbids investments, Article 7, paragraph 5. So is now for you also the time that we should open that, even the hardcore cohesion fund, the big one, where we invest in, rail, etc.? Are we ready for that? And do you also support the idea of this direct funding to the cities mechanism, which can be then be one of the models how the cities can approach to the funding without national governments? Because we have heard what happened with national governments get involved in some of their public policies. And the second, about the labor's rights. Yeah, the shortage of the laborers, the third country nationals, the wages. I know, it's really complicated. And can I ask you, if you have to highlight, I know it's a complex problem which really needs a lot of answers. But if we focus, for example, on the labor inspection as a priority, is this maybe the good way or it's not?
Thank you very much. So let's have a last. You have 1 minute each. Sosha, you need to go, so please go ahead. We'll do like we did just before, and then Leyen can have the last word, as he likes to have.
Yes, I won't address the cities issue. I think others or even Michele could address that. But on European Investment Bank, yes, and on structural funds, I think we are constantly gathering all of the ways EU funding is used in the sector from all of these sources. And indeed, there has been some very positive news. Also, DG Employment has put together a toolkit as well, outlining the different ways the EU finances have been supporting the sector, with some excellent examples. We have also very good experience with EIB. In the last years, they've always said we are a policy taker, not a policy maker. And they've actually worked with the local legislation. I'm not saying it's perfect. The thresholds are still very high. Often we need the best approach we've seen so far is where they've worked together with the Council of Europe Development Bank in France and the National Public Housing Bank and the EIB. So they've teamed together to then make sure the projects they fund on the ground are more diversified and have a much stronger social component, also addressing homelessness. But this approach they've had of being a policy taker, not a policy maker, in general has worked relatively well, with a few points that we've outlined to them. But indeed, we see now a risk that they're going to be putting more finance into construction sector. And obviously, if they increase efficiency in the construction sector, there's no guarantee that those efficiencies will be passed on to the actual people using the homes. There's no guarantee that it will be passed on to produce more affordable housing. So that's an issue. And indeed, they look for scale. So they tend to see that private entities would be able to reach that scale, and we would really question why when we really have in many countries a strong public sector that can be aggregated. So yeah, we do see a risk there, but at the same time a very strong precedent and relatively good working in the past. So we still have some time before they present in March how they want to go ahead. So we hope that we can build on the good approach from the past.
Thanks, Sosha. Thanks. And Pablo, please. Yeah. Thanks.
1 minute. Look, it's not complicated. I'll tell you what's complicated. What's complicated if you Gothenburg and you do a public contract, actually trying to anchor the thing in your local community, and the Federation of Small Businesses takes you to court because you haven't chosen the lowest bidder. That is complicated. And that is what deters local authorities to actually go for sustainable procurement, because they don't want to be in litigation with a big multinational that has 3 times the budget. And that is what has this chill effect on cities who want to do it, but they can't. And there is no bidding about this. Let's just be concrete. If you don't do what they want, they will take you to court. Finish with another anecdote. In France, the institution that actually does controls on daycare centers, les crèches, is starting to employ lawyers because the French multinationals of the private sector dealing with that are taking to court the reports that are being sent. In the past, you would get a little paper saying you have to change this, this, and this, and this. And now they're getting a response. This is defamation. We'll take you to court. This is the level we're getting. It's not a matter of being complicated. You take the lowest bidder out, you make the local, the sustainable, the 0 kilometer as the rules, and it'll be much easier. And, talk to procurers in cities that actually try, and they'll tell you it's like, what we fear is that some big fuckers, excuse me my French, will take us on. That is the real issue.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, so 1 minute. Yes, that's a challenge to say a few final words. It's a lot about what we're discussing today is about public funding. And there's a lot of public funding going already in all of this. Public funding is taxpayers' money. It's our money. And we can expect that when you use public funding that there are conditionalities and that at least things are done in a good, ethical, and also a social manner. So that's the first principle. Second, I partly agree with the fact that public clients are careful because of the complexity and the chilling effect of possible legal proceedings. That's partially true, yes. But there's also another very important truth here that needs to be seen, and it's linked to austerity. Public clients, many cases, also just like and prefer the lowest price because of their budgets being cut, because of the pressure on public clients and public funding. But we need to address this. So this is also an inconvenient truth maybe, but we need to spell it out. And we don't necessarily need to make things complicated. Public clients can already now, under the current public procurement rules, have pre-qualification processes. We had very recently, only a couple of weeks ago, a case in Norway where the Norwegian road transport authority dismissed a tender from an Italian company who had been already severely and several times being punished and also convicted in Denmark, so in a neighboring country, for social fraud and social dumping. And on this basis, this company was actually already in the initial stage of the public tender excluded from the tender. For us, this is perfect. And we discussed this also yesterday. I'm referring to, was a very good meeting with the employers yesterday. So that's maybe why I want to share with you. The employers also agree with us. We have to get rid of all these companies. So, and public authorities can already do that today, but we need to help them. We need to assist them. And probably, I think you're a social partner of EPSU, SGI, no? But maybe this is something we should follow up, because we are working on a joint position with FIEC on how we see the revision of the public procurement rules. I think it would actually be maybe very interesting to do this together also with EPSU and SGI and other important clients in that sense to look at that. And one last thing, what needs to be done? Of course, labor inspections. I mean, and that's also linked to austerity. Instead of more inspectors in the last decade, there have been less and less inspectors. So yes, of course, this needs to be strengthened. But employers are always complaining how things are complicated and difficult and so on. We have a very simple solution. Nobody says that you need to use posting. And nobody says that you need to use long and complex change of subcontracting. To make things more simple, promote direct jobs. So, and we are really hoping and we are really pushing for the European Parliament to also come forward with ideas and initiatives to actually limit subcontracting. So
Lorenzo, you have the last word.
Yeah, the telegraphic. Indeed, Ruben, thanks for the question. And we have now the opportunity of the Public Procurement Directive. And one key element is that we hear over and over and on this I want to second very much what Pablo said, that progressive public authorities, in particular when they want to use public procurement procedures to promote collective bargaining, they do sometimes feel a chilling effect or the risk to be sued. So we need to make sure that the revision of the public procurement directives promotes collective bargaining and ensures that companies that do not respect workers' rights, the right to organize, the right to bargain collectively, are not given and awarded public money. And on that, I can ensure that that will not bring complexity. And by the way, can also contribute to this idea of buying European, if we want, let's say, to have companies that do provide services and goods produced without exploiting working people. But as well, of course, what Tom was saying, this whole discussion we are having is very much linked to the risk of austerity. So we need also to make sure that people are as aware as possible of the risk that we are running there, and we mobilize, we put pressure on the Commission to give as much flexibility to member states as possible. And with regard to the question of Frank, indeed, social conditionalities is key. And we have seen now, just to make an example, the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, Draghi and others are saying, the US is much better place for businesses, much more investments. But in the Inflation Reduction Act, the money for businesses, US included much more conditionalities than the EU included in its projects and its proposals. So businesses are not good businesses are not afraid of conditionalities, because those will also protect them from unfair competitions from employers that are not respecting the rules and are exploiting working people. And finally, indeed, to reply to the question on labor inspectors, just to second in particular the need to have a binding legislative initiatives on subcontracting and labor intermediaries, to introduce a joint and several liability, to limit the length of subcontracting chains. This is very, very important. It's one of the demands of the ETUC also in our manifesto. So if we need to think of let's say, one tool that could be taken up, that could be one good idea.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Lorenzo. Thanks to all the speakers. I'm sorry to have been a little bit rigorous in cutting your speaking time down. There was a lot to discuss, but we do have another session, also with a view to the colleagues online. Thanks online also for your questions, only two of which I could take. We will reconvene now at 11:40, please. We'll have a coffee break. You can have a coffee break sitting at home. We'll have a coffee break until 11:40. Thanks very much for your participation in the first session. The second session will be chaired by Bart. Thank you very much.
I propose, is this on? Propose we get. Is this microphone working? Yes, it is now. All right. So thank you, colleagues, for gathering again. And sorry, Timo, to keep you waiting online. That's the pleasure of chairing the second panel, is that we have to catch up a little bit for the delay of the first one, but I think we're good to go. We have enough time for our discussion. I'll be, as a consequence, even shorter in my introduction than I wanted to be. So we had a very interesting exchange already this morning. We heard about the housing emergency in Europe. Many people struggling to find adequate, decent, and affordable accommodation. And at the same time, we also heard about profits, staggering profits, somebody said, for certain individuals, and especially investment funds in this area. At the same time, and that's why I think, or that's also why we are here together today, there is a little bit, there is one silver lining, and that is indeed that the new Commission President von der Leyen has included a focus on housing, namely through this first ever European Affordable Housing Plan. And that's why we thought at the EGY, this is the moment to organize a dialogue between social stakeholders
writ large, but also with academics and policymakers on the topic. Because, as Sorcha said this morning, this is indeed a window of opportunity which we need to seize. Now, we had a discussion about the very broad topic of housing this morning, and now we found it really important that we focus in the second panel on the more specific issue of homelessness, and which is now very visible. Being somebody who works and is regularly in Brussels, is now very visible, even in the streets of this city. And you probably know we're next to Rue Neuve and Gare du Nord here, where every evening, summer and winter, hundreds of of homeless spend their days and nights. So many important reasons to discuss the topic. Now, the original idea of having this event to begin with also emanated from this book that I like to wave. It's our annual publication on social policy in the EU, which the ETY produces since forever together with the European Social Observatory. And for that occasion, I had asked Timo Weishout, from the University of Göttingen, to produce a chapter on with an assessment of the European platform on combating homelessness, or EPOC. I don't know if I pronounced the acronym correctly, but let's take it from there. So I now want to pass on the floor to Timo to introduce his assessment of this platform, and then we will continue with the other speakers whom I will introduce in a moment. So, Timo, the floor is yours for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you, Timo.
Yeah, thank you, Bart, for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak to everybody on this digital way. I apologize. I would have loved to be in Brussels today, but we had a big event on homelessness in my hometown, Göttingen, yesterday, and it was simply impossible. But without much further ado, let me share my screen. And I hope everybody can see that now. If not,
yes. Yeah, we see your screen. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of EPOC, so the European platform on combating homelessness. And I will talk a little bit about why I think it might actually work out in a sense that it can help reduce homelessness in Europe. The first question, however, is maybe why should a European trade union institute think about homelessness? We heard a lot about low-wage workers earlier today, and housing crisis, and the construction workers, and all these different workers in a sense. But why care about the homeless? Well, I think there's many reasons to care, to think about the homeless, and to care about them, because it is a humanitarian crisis, and that is a humanitarian crisis in one of the richest regions of the world. So I think it's just important, and it's for me flabbergasting that we have so much poverty right in front of our doorsteps. And it's not just a few people that we see on the streets, but it's a lot of people. Fianza has a very conservative estimate of roughly 900,000 homeless people in the EU, but it's probably many, many more if we consider housing crises more generally, precarious housing conditions, housing insecurity, and so on. So it's probably affecting millions of European citizens every day. And the bad news is it's getting worse, not better. In almost all EU countries, homelessness is on the rise, even though we have a target to get rid of homelessness by 2030. And things are not looking good. We heard this morning already housing and rental prices continue to go up, and they grow faster than wages. So that's a big issue. There's no reason to think that migration will disappear. With wars going on, violence, climate change, I think Europe has to be prepared to incorporate more refugees, more migrants than ever before. And that means in the end that already disadvantaged groups are in an ever fiercer competition on affordable housing, and the most vulnerable lose out and become homeless. So that is sort of, in a sense, setting the stage why we should even care about homelessness. Second of all, I want to just very, very briefly give a teaser on the history of homelessness within the European Union context. If we just highlight maybe a few very important steps. I think we can start in 1989 with Fianza that was created, and therefore the homeless for the first time have a lobby. In 1992, we have the European Observatory on Homelessness, and therefore we have evidence-based information to actually, put forward policy ideas. So that's very important. In 2000, with the Lisbon strategy and the birth of the OMC, we have new instruments to tackle poverty and homelessness. For those of you who are not familiar with the OMC, very briefly, the OMC is a method that aims at defining common objectives, monitoring and measuring progress on those objectives, and support progress by mutual learning exercises. So that's in a very brief nutshell how the OMC works. And this is important because EPOC more or less works like an OMC. In 2010, with the Europe 2020 strategy, we have the European Platform Against Poverty as a new momentum, thinking about the most extreme and most precarious form of poverty, namely homelessness. And then finally, in 2017, we have the European Pillar on Social Rights, and we have the Principle 19 codified in there. So housing becomes a European issue, that it becomes sort of institutionalized in the pillar. And in 2021, then finally, the creation of EPOC and the pledge to end homelessness by 2030. So what you see here is it took more than 30 years from the creation of Fianza to become really a European issue at EU level. And that's really interesting, but you can read about the history of it a little bit more in my book chapter that Bart was just referring to. I think more interesting for today, or more relevant for today, is how does EPOC even work? So before we talk about institutional design, I think it's very important to underline that there has been unanimous political support at the highest level for EPOC. So all European member states, the Commission, and a large variety of societal actors and stakeholders have endorsed EPOC. So there's no doubt that this is an important issue. Second of all, we have, through EPOC, the institutionalization of a proclamation of change. It sounds a bit wordy right now, but it is more or less only a promise that we want to work towards ending homelessness. And we have this common goal. And it's a proclamation because there's no real legislation behind it, just like there isn't for the OSC. But what we have some people working on it. We have a secretariat, so there's people and places. That's important when we think about EPOC. And there's a work program. And the work program has three elements, and I will discuss each of them in a moment. But essentially, just like for the OMC, we have a goal which we want to monitor and measure the progress towards. We have a context where member states can learn with and from each other. And we have at least, maybe not new funding, but we have means to, or ways to, enhance access to available EU funding so that actually policies can be implemented at the local level. So why should EPOC, as this very soft mode of governance, work? What's the promise? How could it work? Well, we know, and Bart knows this much better than I do actually, that the OMC has had an impact on EU social legislation and social policy. Why? Because it creates knowledge, and knowledge is power, we know that. It creates a common language so member states can communicate with each other. And there's evidence basis for the arguments that are being put forward. So with that, we create knowledge, momentum, awareness, and so on, which is important if we want to tackle this very, very difficult challenge of homelessness. It's a very, very complicated issue because it is so multifaceted. Second, we have data, or we try to gather data. And this is super, in my opinion, it's super relevant because once there are statistics and we can refer to statistics and statistics come in the media, homelessness becomes harder to ignore as a political progress. So on the one hand side, that's important. On the other hand, somebody at a Fianza conference once said, if you can't end what you can't measure, So if you really want to look at the progress towards ending homelessness, you need data to really track that. So data, I think, becomes really crucial in fighting homelessness. We also see, thirdly, that member states have reacted to EPOC already, because we have, in many, many member states, national action plans to end homelessness. So bringing together a wide variety of stakeholders working towards the goal of ending homelessness. And hopefully this triggers, fourthly, a domino effect, because once some member states or maybe local municipalities realize or see that you can actually successfully fight homelessness, and there's things we can learn from each other, and EPOC might be the means to learn, or a tool to learn from others, that will sort of bring followers into the boat and to participate in EPOC. Fifthly, and also maybe just as important, I think EPOC becomes a lever for new ideas and for pressure groups to actually say, hey, there's countries out there, member states, who are more successful than others. What are they doing? And they can push policymakers to adopt new policies and new ways of thinking about how to end homelessness. And lastly, as I already said before, there is an attempt to make financing more accessible, to tie sort of these big EU funds also to homelessness and ideas how to tackle homelessness. So I think EPOC can work, even if it's a very soft way of governance, even softer than the OMC. It still has a potential to make a change if there's people who pick it up and run with it, in a sense, spreading the word, creating knowledge, creating awareness, using as a lever, and teaching good lessons how to move forward. But it has its challenges. EPOC has its challenges because, firstly, data collection on homelessness is very burdensome. It's a very tedious task to get data on it, because we first have to agree on what actually is homelessness. What do we include? And that's very thorny, because the broader the definition, the bigger the problem becomes, and the more hesitant politicians and policymakers are to accept that definition, right? Because the bigger the problem, the more money you have to take in your hands to solve it. So I think that's politically very difficult, but it's also technically challenging, because homelessness, what you see maybe at the North Gare Nord in Brussels, is the tip of the iceberg, because most homelessness is invisible, and you don't see the people affected by it. So how do you measure something you can't see? It's a big challenge. Data fluidity. Some people might be homeless one point in time, but then they have a home and then they lose it again. Or they might be in a shelter and then they're out again. So that's very difficult. And you have the issue of double counting, because if you ask NGOs how many clients they have, they might double count the clients, because some homeless people might be at the homeless shelter, but they might also be at other NGOs that provide other services. And so avoiding double counting is a challenge. All of this is not impossible to deal with, but it becomes burdensome and thorny. So that's a challenge. Secondly, and maybe most importantly, and this is something I am faced with very regularly, because I'm trying to bring these ideas also to the local community level here in my hometown, putting words into actions. So making homelessness a priority for government more generally speaking is difficult, because while ministers say, we need to fight homelessness, getting the words, putting these words into action is difficult. That is a difficult challenge at the national level, but also at the commission level, regional level, local level as well. And I think one of the main problems that I see is that homelessness is falling sort of across at least two commissions or ministries at the national level, because you have the social affairs people, and then you have the housing people, and usually they're separated in different units. You have different DGs, you have different ministries, and so on. And how do you get these people together, work together? It's very difficult. And then, of course, you have the federal issues, and you have a lack of resources, lack of staff. So putting these words into actions is challenging. And thirdly, a big challenge, and this is something we heard a lot about this morning, is there's just not enough housing. We have, or put differently, we have enough housing, but it's distributed in a way where there's shortages in some areas and too much housing in other areas. But we can't just move the houses from, the surplus areas and put them into the areas where there's housing needed. It just doesn't work like that. And so how do you end homelessness without housing? But housing is expensive. It takes a long time. It's ecologically damaging. We heard all about this morning. So that's tricky. But also regulating housing markets is very politically challenging. A lot of politicians don't want to interfere with housing markets or to think about redistribution of housing. In Germany, just as an example, we have more per square meter, more housing than ever before per person. So we have more space, but at the same time, we have very, very many people who are suffering from housing, for homelessness. So it's a distribution problem. We have some people who have 1, 2, 3, 4 houses, and others have none, and you can't just redistribute that. It doesn't work like that. So that's a big challenge, I think, for EPOC, how to deal with that. If you don't have housing, how do you end homelessness? And coming to my final slide, so we have a little bit time also for the discussion later. Where do we go from there? I think from this brief overview that I could give you is we need to accept compromises and data imperfections and then continue improving our measurement and monitoring. But we shouldn't stop saying, oh, no, we don't measure this because it's burdensome. So let's start with something that might not be perfect, but keep running with it. Because once we start this thing, then we can always improve it. But we shouldn't not start it just because there's concerns about this. Second of all, this came up this morning as well. We need political leadership at all levels. Even the European Commission could be a leader in fighting homelessness, but also national, regional, and local politicians need to lead fighting it. And which was also said earlier in the discussions, we need a broad alliance of various stakeholders. If you only think about the most marginalized groups and their NGOs, we can't fight homelessness. So it's great that the trade unions find this interesting, but we need city planners, we need architects, and so on. We need a broad alliance to really think about how we tackle homelessness. Because thirdly, we can't just build more houses. Building can't be the solution because that would damage the environment and torpedo climate change efforts. We need new innovations. So we maybe need to, if we can't, just build houses everywhere and have no more free spaces at all. Maybe we need to go higher, or maybe we need to live smaller and smaller houses. Maybe we have to come up with new ways of sharing spaces. Maybe we need to find efforts how to connect vacancies with people. So mobility is a big issue. We heard about folks this morning who said we need more nonprofit oriented housing. Absolutely. And we also need to disincentivize the non-use of housing. So I think we need to really think very, very broadly and if we want to stop homelessness and not only think about how can we make building houses quicker or cheaper. That's not going to be the solution. And that's unfortunately something that I hear mainly only at the local level, that the social policymakers always say, oh, this is not our problem because what we need is more housing, and that's something that the market has to fix. Okay, so we need new innovation, and for that we need broader alliances, and EPOC can help with that, I believe. So I was racing through this, but I was trying to really keep under the 20 minutes. Here again, a nice little picture to the book that Bart mentioned. If you found this interesting that I said, then please go ahead and look at the chapter. There's much, much more detail in there. And I hope you got a little bit out of my discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Timo. I hope you could hear the round of applause that you deserved. Good to see you again, also in good shape, it seems. Thanks for flagging that homelessness is a significant problem, one that is not only on the rise, but also largely invisible. Your assessment, of course, of the newly created European platform. The promises, including in terms of data collection, learning, production of national action plans. It brings me back, I admit, to the good old days of the open method of coordination. Let's see if we need to use that term again. But also pointing out the key challenges, including with regard to the question how to end homelessness without housing. And then you brought us to some forward-looking ideas where to go from here, including among your ideas disincentivizing the non-use of housing. So thanks for that, Timo. And indeed, lots more in your chapter. I've already waved the book here, and thank you for doing the same thing. So we've asked to begin with Giulio Romani, who is a Confederal Secretary at the European Trade Union Confederation, to share his thoughts on the topic. We already learned from Lorenzo Repetti this morning that ETUC is indeed very much in support of this epoch and was so from the beginning. Giulio will speak in Italian, so if you don't speak Italian and you don't have a headset yet, they are just outside the room, and you need to just choose between channels 1 and 2 because that's where you have English and Italian. Please, Giulio, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes. Grazie.
Thank you, Bert. Il tema che stiamo affrontando è un tema.
The topic we are talking about today is a very, very complex topic because it's somehow overlapping to what we said before in the previous part of this morning debate. The issue has been defined. We've seen the figures as quite staggering. It's true, the topic of homelessness is something that is very present when there's no policy that can meet the needs of the families, and most especially that cannot really answer the need for housing for those vulnerable, more fragile groups in our society. It's clear that the topic becomes quite something that is unachievable. I would try to be brief and mainly speak about 5 points: the roots of this issue, and we might find solutions to that. These roots are the main reason for this staggering growth of homelessness in Europe, in one of the richest continents of the world. Then another point would be the vulnerability, and then migration policies that are part of our vulnerability, but there are more specific targets. And then another point would be on the income and salaries and retirement scheme and the minimum salary. And then public investment in social housing and public housing, and then the speculation in the housing sector, causing so many negative effects, but that is well going beyond. Well, I'll be very, very brief. Well, let's start with vulnerability. The fact that we have no house is mostly linked to the fact that there are underlying conditions that are not only economic conditions. Most of the time, it's linked to personal conditions, specific conditions that need social support. I can give you an example. Women that are victims of violence, they have to flee their house, and maybe the economic condition was not that dire, but they were depending on their violent husband, so they're leaving their house and they have no income. And they were not poor before, so they need social support. We have a clear example in Spain. This is one of the vulnerability conditions that can lead to homelessness. And then other conditions that are related to disability or the conditions that are related to specific diseases. Sometimes these disorders are making the patient feel guilty, like people that are alcohol addict or they are gamers and they have this sort of addiction and they are not assisted by social workers. So this is maybe a topic that we might have to deal with. I think that the approach should be a holistic and cross-sectoral approach. It will be one of social supports, not only a problem of social housing. We are not solving the problem by building new houses. This is quite obvious. Someone who is an addict, even though they had access to social housing, they might die in the streets as well. Then migration policies. Migration policies should be regulated. We have regulations for refugees and asylum seekers that somehow are establishing the right to decent housing. But there are so many regulations, conventions, and declarations at a European level. We could have a 2-3 pages list, but we don't have a specific competence in Europe on this, and this might be a huge limit. We could not find consistent legislation for that reason. So, for migration policies, it is not only a matter of pushback or welcoming migrants. I do deal with this. This is not what we are talking today. But we should consider how migration is dealt with. If migration can be made more regular and legal, if those migrants are working, if they can be recognized as legal migrants, if they can work in that country so that they can have access to housing, because if they are not working, they cannot pay for their rent and they cannot sign a contract. And then for families, families that can have a decent income to pay for housing, they can also have the family come to the country they're working in. Most of the time, the migrant worker has not enough money to call for their family here. And most of the time, they're exploited by organizations. Two minutes. And then the income. We know that we have a huge salary crisis. We have the problem of low retirement schemes And we know that social partners are very active in this. And then public investments. Lorenzo said it before, so I'll be brief on this. Public investments are needed, and it might be possible to do that. There are so many social and public housing that are available, and they might be renovated and reused to become decent houses, but public investments are blocked by the policies that we are opposing to. And then housing speculation. I think that altogether we should support project that is well beyond housing speculation. We have been suffering for 30 years of this deregulated finance world, managing the housing market in a very unsatisfying way with these prices that are unachievable for most of the people on the market. And now we have Elon Musk on the forefront in the political sphere, which is pushing for this. Because of this, we had 8 crises worldwide, and this had an impact so that there are a few that are the richest and all the others that are suffering. This is one of the essential elements that brought us to this. This is why we need a very holistic approach on the taxing system, on the regulation of financial and housing markets, and on humanitarian regulation, and all the other regulation on migration and investment in the social sphere. If we do this, we might solve the problem of homelessness. Otherwise, we will just be trying to find a solution. It's not long term. The problem is there. The reasons are very complex for this, but we are trying to fight this as if fighting climate change by bringing people in a place where there's no sun. This is not enough.
Thank you very much, Giulio, for first discussing the roots of this issue at stake, but also linking it to much broader topics, including migration, access to social protection, public investment, housing speculation, and indeed, as you mentioned in the end, climate change. Lots of lots of food for thought for discussion afterwards. I would like to now pass on to Ruth Owen, who is Deputy Director at FEANZA. I couldn't help noticing that Timo, of course, also in view of the time when the chapter was written, referred a lot to the promises of this newly created platform on combating homelessness and the challenges. But by now, I suppose we know quite a bit about how it is effectively delivering, or maybe not at all. So please, the floor is yours. Next 10 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you, Bart. Thanks for the teaser. Thank you, Giulio. I think one of the main things I took away from your intervention is that whilst homelessness is always about housing, it is most definitely not only about housing, and we should never lose sight of that. Timo, thank you very much, both for the paper and the presentation. As Bart said, some time has passed now since it was first published. I very much liked your introduction when you said epoch might actually work out. And I think the title for this session was Is Epoch Delivering Against the Odds? I think it depends a little bit what you mean by delivering. I think I would add to your assessment by saying it might actually work out, and quite a lot has worked out already, although there's absolutely no space for complacency on the issue of homelessness in the European Union right now. So I would obviously, I guess, agree with your initial assessment, which is that homelessness is a serious and worsening humanitarian crisis in one of the richest areas of the world. The estimate that you cited is a little bit out of date. Finance's latest estimate is at least 1.2 million people are sleeping rough or in temporary accommodation every night in the European Union. We have for the first time some European data on the prevalence of experience of homelessness amongst the general population. So EU Silk has an ad hoc module asking about housing difficulties, which has taught us that almost 5% of the total EU population have experienced some form of homelessness in their lifetime, and that is more like 8% amongst the poor population. So this is a significant issue. The data from the national level shows us that homelessness is increasing or stable in most member states. There are one or two exceptions. Finland is probably the most notable, that has brought homelessness down into the hundreds from 20,000 in the 1980s. So if the measure of success is the number of homeless people falling, I have to say EPOC is not delivering. We're not on track. We're not on track to meet this goal of ending homelessness by 2030. However, I would suggest that that's perhaps not the right measure of success at this juncture. EPOC was launched in 2021. We have heard a lot today about subsidiarity and the role of the European Union. Let's just be really frank. It is not the role of the European Union to end homelessness. It is the role of the European Union to play its part and to contribute to that effort. And I think EPOC is a big step forward on those terms. So maybe a little bit about what I think has been achieved. And then I'll move on to what more I think is possible and what might help bridge this gap to actual impact on the ground. So I think EPOC has achieved unprecedented political buy-in on the goal of ending homelessness. All EU member states, all EU institutions, and a whole range of stakeholders, including ETUC, which is wonderful, and I would like to thank them for taking up the issue of homelessness and thank ETUI for its interest in the issue and for organising this event today. They have agreed to what Timo called the institutionalization of a proclamation of change. And that's really not to be underestimated. Yes, it's a proclamation and it's not enforceable, but homelessness is not very well managed in most European countries. We tolerate homelessness massively. The best most public policy does is manage the worst effects of the problem. And here we at least have visible political buy-in to the goal of ending homelessness. I think EPOC has also established a common direction. So there is this goal of ending homelessness, and there is an agreement that the way to achieve that is to move from managing homelessness as a perpetual emergency to prevention of homelessness, rehousing homeless people, and providing support to people who need additional support. And that is not the status quo. Homelessness is generally managed by night shelter, so a place where you can stand in a long line. If you're lucky, you'll get in, and you can stay overnight. You have to leave in the morning. The quality of social support that goes along with that is very poor. These are places that are overcrowded, unhealthy. COVID certainly underlined that point, and they're not in line with human dignity and the European social model that we're supposed to be so proud of. One of the goals of EPOC is to ensure that every member state has a homelessness strategy to try and plan public policy and align it with this goal of ending homelessness. Currently, half member states have such a strategy, and I think EPOC has helped get to a point where we have taken stock of that, and more member states are developing strategies. And I think in the next phase of EPOC, we need to have a lot more work evaluating the actual quality of those strategies. So, yeah, I think EPOC has been a huge step forward in terms of the European Union embracing the role it can play on ending homelessness. I think EPOC can't end homelessness in and of itself, but it can help to turn the tide and support public policy, which makes homelessness rare, brief, and unrepeated. I thank Timo for the comparison with the OMC. I think EPOC has some similarities with the OMC, some differences. One of the major differences is you have the right people around the table, because homelessness is often managed by, in some countries, it's the health ministry, sometimes housing, sometimes social. And in the social OMC, homelessness could never really take off as an issue because you didn't necessarily have the people in charge of homelessness policies around the table. The other thing I would say is that the OMC has a lot on its plate, and EPOC is innovative in that it's a specific instrument on a specific social problem. I'd say it's also another advantage is that it has at least tried to combine the kind of familiar, well, you call them national action plans, but these homelessness strategies, the mechanisms of the OMC, which were very much about reporting and taking stock, with some carrots. So there is a funding and finance work stream in the European Platform on Combating Homelessness, and a big focus on learning and exchange. And I think that's a really key area. I think looking forward, we are at the very beginning of a new mandate for the European Commission. There are, as we heard this morning, some important hooks to continue and strengthen the work on ending homelessness and the EU's role therein. So there's this first ever EU affordable housing plan, and also the planned anti-poverty strategy. I think both need to explicitly address homelessness. EPOC, I think EPOC's main home will be in the anti-poverty strategy, but we can't have a first ever EU affordable housing plan that doesn't demonstrably contribute to ending homelessness. And I think we have to bear that in mind when we define exactly what the affordable housing plan should do, where the money should go. And I think there's huge scope to scale up the approaches that we already know work, like rehousing homeless people and doing housing first. On the affordable housing plan, I think Timo said, housing is a distribution problem. We absolutely welcome the EU stepping up to playing a role in challenging the housing crisis. I think we need realism about the role that private investment can play, especially when it comes to housing that is affordable and accessible to the people at risk of homelessness. So they are people on the lowest incomes. The market cannot deliver for them. Even patient capital that's happy with a rate of 3% over 30 years cannot deliver rents that are low enough for people who are at risk of or who have experienced homelessness. So we can't be blind to that, and we have to be really, really careful about the crowding out of genuinely affordable social housing with this more nebulous concept of affordable housing. Like, I'm from the UK, affordable housing is defined as 80% of the market rent. That is irrelevant to a poor person living in London. So I'm cautious about that. Similarly, on the question of state aid reform, perhaps that's a point of difference with some of the other speakers who spoke today. I think it's a very risky move, and I'm not sure what we can replace the SGI definition with if it's not disadvantaged citizens who struggle to find housing on the market. And I think that it might expose the social housing sector to really fierce competition from the private sector to do all kinds of things that we can categorize as affordable or responsible housing, but which won't deliver anything on housing needs. So I say, great to have an affordable housing plan. It has to set out to tackle housing needs, things like homelessness, overcrowding, poor housing conditions. Like, we must understand housing as a living conditions issue. Supply can't do everything, and the EU should look at its role in tackling financialisation and in promoting ways to regulate the housing market. Epoch, I think we should carry on as we've started. I think we should carry on the work on data and monitoring policies. I think we should carry on the work on funding and finance, and there should be a special part of the affordable housing plan dedicated to financing solutions to prevent and rehouse homeless people. I think that the mutual learning is a really, really important piece, because most homelessness policies are not good, and there's a huge scope for reform. And then I think there are some things that we're not doing currently that we could do, and one of them is mainstreaming homelessness into other policy areas. I thank Giulio very much for raising migration, and I think we increasingly see migration policies that literally generate homelessness. You mentioned Brussels earlier. We now see Ireland and the Netherlands copying Belgium in denying access to reception conditions and literally leaving people in the street. So I think in the context of the Migration Pact, that's something we can also take up at EU level. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Ruth. So homelessness is not only about housing, but it's also about housing.
Always about housing.
It's always about housing. Thank you for making that clear, even. Quite a lot has worked out with this epoch, including, I wrote down, the political buy-in, at least in about half of the member states. I wrote down, and you updated the figures that were presented earlier. 1.2 million people at least affected, 5% of the EU population. And then you explained a number of policy tools. I thought that Timo and I were the last persons to mention the open method of coordination, but apparently it's still out there, including mutual learning, exchange, mainstreaming you mentioned, and then some other EU policy tools have been mentioned. So I think that this is the moment where we need to listen to a representative of the European Commission. So I'm very happy that you're with us here today, Katarina. You're Director of Social Rights and Inclusion in DG Employment. The floor is yours for the next 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bart. And well, there is not much to say after everybody spoke, but it's also really great to be here listening to from the other views how does EPOCH or our platform on combating homelessness works or doesn't work, but it works. So how does it works? Excellent presentation, team. I just simply could subscribe to everything you said on the different strengths of the platform. And I have indeed also a long list of activities I would like to share with you, but let me maybe quickly I'll try to give you also the Commission view and my personal view of how it all started and how it works and why and what is indeed the success factor. So in 2021, when the idea about the creation of the platform was in really inception phase, there was a huge challenge who would be a part of the platform. There was also an idea to invite few member states that are very active in combating homelessness, that could deliver maybe faster, better, and more. But the approach that we took, which in the end turned out to be the best approach, was to get political buying from all member states. That I still consider today the biggest success of the platform. Then, when we got the member states to commit and to sign the Lisbon Declaration, it was very much visible that they themselves won't be able to resolve anything if not fully aware of all the faces of the homelessness. So the idea to bring together civil society, all the other stakeholders dealing with disability, with homelessness, social partners are in, the consultative committees are in. That was a big novelty. That was a new, I would dare to say, innovative way forward. Would it happen without huge push from FEANZA and the others? I'm not sure. Maybe it would be still remaining in the OMC world type of activities, much less in dynamic and much less in impact. So it's really important to have a good stakeholders that also will push you when needed. Then the second task, after getting them all, was to make sure that there is that good dialogue and that there is a trust among the stakeholders. To create this a safe space for those dealing with homelessness. That was the first time that we brought together all the services from the national level and also from the European level that are working on homelessness. And we wanted them to, first of all, have not the same, but understand what a homelessness is, how it can be dealt, which are the key drivers. We had a series of mutual learning. We had 6 events in 2.5 years. And then we continued after we exhausted the topics from the definition of the homelessness funding, some specific aspects of homelessness. We also saw that for many stakeholders, a different approach might be needed. So we introduced the new era, or I would dare to say, of the mutual learning, which is much more dynamic, much more needs-oriented, and much more adapted for the needs of specific cohorts within the platform. Then, after we have put together this safe space and the dialogue and took them through the different aspects, I would really dare to say that the biggest success as well is the fact that around 15 member states since then have created the national strategies. We know that without strategic framework, nothing could work. And that's indeed a visible and tangible result. So what the future brings, I think we need to continue on this good wave. We have something that is very powerful in terms of the decision making and policy making. We need to get 27 strategic frameworks. And we need to put housing on the agenda of all the future initiatives. And mostly in these 2 that Ruth has mentioned, the anti-poverty, which is without any question, the homelessness is most visible form of poverty or social exclusion, but also in the housing, affordable housing action plan. I have to say, I worry a bit when it comes to the affordable housing, because we see many stakeholders wanting to focus much more when it comes to the affordable housing, to the middle class and the challenges that they are having. I always say that we have to think about also about those who are more in need of housing, more in need of social housing, social affordable rental, or however we call it. But we know what it is and what is meant by it. And this is, I think, a dangerous trap that we must avoid. Here, I hope that we can count on all of you to be indeed very talkative, and that's why thanks a lot, Bart, for putting the topic of affordable housing and homelessness in the same conference at the same time, because it's easy to forget. You don't see it, you don't hear it, you don't think about it. So that's one of the biggest tasks that we will have when it comes to the future strategic frameworks. Before that, we might have an action plan on the second phase of the pillar, where also the key elements of the future initiatives will be put there. In these 3 years, a lot has happened in cooperation with the different stakeholders. We developed, and next week we will launch on the 13th, on Friday 13th. Hope not much symbolic there. We will launch the OECD toolkit on homelessness, which is practically a guide for everyone who is dealing with homelessness. And when we developed this toolkit together with OECD, we had in mind that a member state would take this toolkit and then go by each and individual chapter and use it as a checklist when developing their strategies. When speaking about member states, when I say a member state, I don't mean just the national governments. Local and regional level are extremely important because services and housing are in the cities, villages, municipalities. So this is also an additional challenge to keep them on board at all the time. We have been implementing several projects in the area of homelessness. One is the pilot project led by KU Leuven on counting of homeless. And the implementation of the project is, I would dare to say, quite well on track. In October and November, we had the counting in first 10 cities. Is it 10 cities? Yes. In the future, we go we double the amount of the cities. But it also shows all the challenges that we as the policymakers and those dealing with homeless and especially with the data might be facing, because it's really quite challenging to have the counting in all the cities, in all the member states at one given point in time. And that's something that this project will show. The data that we are using today are indeed between the figure that you have seen and Timo communicated, and the Ruth and OECD estimates around 1 million homeless every single day. But the fact that the data are quite challenging together and assess, and there is a lots of extrapolation. But then how else do you do it? Then by really looking into the figures. But this is something that we hope that pilot project will be useful in terms that methodology will be defined, and then we will be able to give it to the member states to deal with the methodology. So I'm closing with the financing. Key of key of success of every policy and every activity in the area of combating homelessness. After we saw that there are lots of players when it comes to the funding, the ERDF, the ESF, InvestEU, Recovery and Resilience Facility came as the post-COVID agenda. We figure out that our usual stakeholders do not have the experience in using the funds. That's the first thing. Second of all, we saw that beyond speaking with national authorities, we need to open the space for also interested cities to have a place where they will discuss the access to financing and also help them in preparing the projects on combating homelessness. That's why we partnered with the CEB, the Council of Europe Development Bank, and we are co-chairing Commission and the CEB, the working strand or working group on access to financing. Up until now, they had a really difficult task in bringing together. So they presented all the work of the CEB, but it's just a small portion. And they are implementer of InvestEU and advisory hub of the InvestEU. But they also brought together other players like EIB, other managing authorities, dealing with ERDF, ESF, in order to see how the synergies and bundling, which something that bankers like a lot. So this was important, and it's important that this group continues, that the work is even more strengthened. And then we all will be waiting next year, June, when the new MFF would be proposed, to see how the issue of affordable housing and social housing and fight against homelessness and housing first would be embedded in this very important and strategic document. So I would stop here. And if you ask me, yes and no, does the platform work? The reply is absolutely yes.
Thank you very much, Katharina. That was a clear answer, and it seemed that there is some agreement on the fact that this platform at least led to a considerable political buy-in of the topic, and that is quite something in itself, by bringing together a broader range of stakeholders than certainly was the case before. So 15 national strategies. My question then would be, how are we going to get to 27? But we'll get back to that. And thanks also for flagging some of the ongoing and next steps, Katharina, with regard to data gathering, counting. And I very much, I noted down your worry about the fact that this affordable housing strategy should not forget all these people, 1 million you mentioned, that are homeless, and that it should not only be focusing on middle classes. And that's exactly why, indeed, today we wanted to have those debates together in a single event. So because it is always about housing, right? All right, we have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So the floor is yours. Slowly but certainly, the smell of food is entering the room, but we can ignore that. Let's take the time that we have for some Q&A. There was a question, yes, I think in the back there, please.
Yeah,
is that
I will.
Oh,
It works. Yeah.
it does. And please, very brief questions, if we can.
Okay. It's difficult for me. So I'm Laurent Durcel, secretary of the Syndicat des Immenses, who is the union of homeless persons in Brussels. And I'm also a social worker. And I have one remark for Timo. He speaks about the institutionalization of a proclamation of change. But we deeply think that is not enough. We need a societalization of the problem. It's just like slavery. One day, the whole society has to say together, we stop with homelessness, and the institutionalization is a tool, but is not enough. A stronger disagreement and a big surprise concerning Giulio and Ruth, because she agreed with that, with what Giulio said, is that you both said, if I understood correctly, that homelessness is not only a housing problem. And we really deeply disagree with that, because what's going on today is exactly your hypothesis. Is not that simple. Is also a social health problem, as we say in Belgium. And this is the basic ground of Belgian policies, and it doesn't work. Because whenever the hypothesis, which is absolutely weird, is that the promise is that, well, you have a social health problem, we will solve it, and all of a sudden you will get a house. It is absolutely not the situation. So of course there are exceptions.
Could you wrap up, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
There are exceptions, of course. It is always the worst, the most terrible example we give. But 90% of homeless person just need a house, affordable house, period. And they don't need a social health help.
All right. Thank you so much. There was a question in the back. I think that's Amano, or not. And then, Pablo?
Thank you very much.
Does this work? Yes. So my name is Amana Ferro from the European Roma Grassroots Organizations Network. I just wanted to very briefly touch upon Roma housing because we spoke that we are also talking about housing for the most vulnerable. In that context, obviously, the Roma are some of the most disadvantaged categories in Europe when it comes to access to housing, but also existing living conditions. According to FANSA's own definition, the ethos definition of homelessness is not just rooflessness, but it's also living in a housing situation that is completely unsuitable due to overcrowding, due to insecurity, or due to all sorts of other such factors. And by that definition, the very vast majority of Europe's Roma are homeless. Are de facto homeless. I won't dwell on the aspects of availability, affordability, and quality, including for social housing that were mentioned also this morning. These are very important for Roma communities. I just wanted to make one brief point about anti-gypsyism in housing and housing exclusion because of discrimination and racism. Racism specifically, but also intersectional discrimination. This leads to Roma being discriminated in access to housing by sometimes the very social housing entities who are there to help them, by local authorities, by neighbors, by landlords, by everybody. This leads to segregation, spatial segregation, which is a massive issue with segregated Roma communities, as well as forced evictions. I won't dwell on them because you know what I'm talking about, but I wanted to put them up there. Data collection, which was mentioned in the presentation this morning, is absolutely essential, including desegregated by factors such as ethnic background to get a clearer picture. But my question that I wanted to ask is, we have a union of equality, and we must work to have fruitful synergies and mutually reinforcing implementation between the Union of Equality and the mainstream socio-economic frameworks of the European Union, such as the European Semester and the European Social Pillar Action Plan, including the upcoming anti-poverty strategy and affordable housing initiatives. So we are hoping to see, we have objectives in the EU Roma Strategic Framework, which is under the Union of Equality on Roma housing, as well as on Roma poverty. So my question was, first of all, to Katarina Ivankovic-Knežević, thank you very much for being here with us today. How can we reinforce these synergies between these two very ambitious projects of the EU, particularly because now we have Executive Vice President Manzato with the responsibility for both? So we hope to see more mainstreaming of equality and discrimination concerns in overarching socioeconomic policies of the EU, and also, of course, to the ETUC and FANSA, who are our long-standing partners. We thank you for the work that you do for Roma inclusion, but any thoughts you want to share about how to better look at Roma houses or housing also from the perspective of your portfolios are obviously welcome. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking a bit of time.
Thank you, Amana. And then there was a question from Pablo, I believe. Are there other questions at this stage? If not, we take it back to this side of the table. Please, Pablo.
Will be telegraphic. Your thoughts on the fact that we are at the lowest record of unemployment, but doesn't seem to have an impact on homelessness. And if you could define middle classes in this context, because I don't know, if 70% of your wages go into housing, what class are you in is beyond my understanding. Thank you.
All right. Are there other questions? No? Okay, then we take it back to this side of the table. So a question from Laurent. Very happy to have you here, Laurent. Institutionalization is not enough. Maybe Timo wants to comment on that, but he also challenged Ruth and Julio's stance on homelessness is not only a housing problem. So I would like the colleagues to comment on that. And then Amana, thank you for your comments about Roma housing, anti-gypsyism, data collection. I remember the slogan, no data, no progress. Where are we now? Katarina, what about the Union of Equality? How can you reinforce synergies between EU policies? And then thank you, Pablo, your comment. Low unemployment, but nothing seems to change with regard to homelessness. So very good questions and comments. And I see that Ruth is eager to get started because your hand is already on the microphone. Go ahead, Ruth. And then we'll go back to Timo online.
Always prepared. Maybe just to start with the question of housing, I think we are absolutely on the same page that the solution to homelessness is always housing. I think My comment was more in relation to some people do need other kinds of support as well as housing, but you won't solve their housing problem by first addressing their other problems. But I think when it comes to policy and particularly to prevention, homelessness is not only about housing. And what I said in relation to migration policy, I think is also true in relation to anti-discrimination policy, youth care and the way people are discharged from different institutions in our societies. There are many, many public policy opportunities to block established pathways into homelessness, and we often miss them. And so I think we have to mobilize other public policies to achieve ending homelessness. I don't think that you have to solve other problems before people can access housing. On the question of Roma housing conditions, absolutely, I think we're on the same page. It's an issue that we work on, both in homelessness per se and housing exclusion more broadly. I think it's good that housing has risen up the agenda a little bit in the Roma inclusion strategy. It was not very strong in the early years. I think the comment I made on mainstreaming stands there as well. In relation to employment, we don't have really precise figures, but there is quite a lot of evidence that a growing part of the homeless population is in some kind of employment. And on the middle class question, I'm not going to define middle class. I think everybody thinks they are middle class. But I think on the housing issue, well, at least, no, that's misspoken probably there. But on the housing, I just think that the EU's scope on the housing crisis is very limited, and we will have to make some priorities. And if we really believe that housing is a human rights issue, then we have to go after the egregious violations of that right, including, but obviously not exclusively, homelessness. And I think sometimes a bit frustrating when you work on homelessness that you're constantly told social housing should not be only for the poorest. There is no country in Europe and no country in the world where social housing is only for the poorest. And this argumentation is often used as a way to do nothing for people who are most marginalized in our housing systems. So I think we can, if you look at housing exclusion statistics, the income quintiles are very important, and the housing cost over burden rate, for example, is 30% in the lowest income quintile, and then I think 8% in the next. So it's I think it's an important part of the picture. An affordable housing agenda shouldn't be an excuse to drift away from meeting the most urgent housing needs.
Okay, thank you. Timo, any final thoughts from your end? We can't hear you for the moment. Are you muted?
Okay. Now it should work.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment the first comment that we need socialization of change, not just the proclamation of change. I think this is a really nice way of framing it, because I myself am super flabbergasted, frustrated that we as a society just walk by the poorest of the poor, the homeless, and we just accept it. And I find this really, really flabbergasting. And tying it back to EPOC, I think EPOC can make a difference for municipalities, policymakers who want to change and don't know how. They might get some ideas, but that's probably the minority. I think more in my pessimistic view, maybe. But in a more strategic point of view, I think EPOC can create a lever that you can point with data, with good practice examples, with just pointing, sort of waving the finger to policymakers and say, look, there's municipalities, there's countries who can do better. Why don't you do it? And so tying it back to EPOC, maybe EPOC can make a little contribution to actually getting there where we want to be, that we don't have to accept this human suffering anymore. Thank you.
And thank you for being with us today. Giulia, we'll come back to you.
Ok. Abbiate pazienza, ma la mia voce...
Sorry.
Ho finito l'effetto del cortisone. E avevo
Unfortunately,
tre-
I took some cortisone, but now it's not working anymore, so my voice is a bit hoarse. But you can hear me. I think you've already answered somehow, and I didn't have to answer it myself, so we'll be brief. Of course, if there's someone in the street, the first need is to give a house. Yes, of course. But if I don't deal with the roots why this person is in the street today, I will give him a place to stay, but then tomorrow I will have another person needing a house, so I cannot build more houses every day. I will have to create the conditions to avoid people living in the street. So amongst this, the fight against racism, discrimination, the fight against social problems like or policies that will help people not to spend 70% of their salary on their house or their rent. Of course, we can act on the prices of housing, but also on the income, on the salaries. Otherwise, we are just compressing. I ended with a metaphor. I will try to use another one. If something breaks in my house, the first thing I have to do, if my basin is broken and I have water all over my apartment, I have to find my boots, but then I have to repair it. Otherwise, the house I will have the water inside my boots.
Thank you, Giulia. Marina, please.
Thanks a lot. So let me take it from Union of Equality and the Roma issue. There are so many challenges when it comes to the housing of Roma population that it's really difficult to know where to start. I'll share with you really my personal opinion about it, and this is that in order to address the Roma housing issue, one would have to invest in Roma settlements. This doesn't always comes hand in hand with no segregation policy and the approach. So I think Roma community and everybody should work on the preparations and on the activities when it comes to the next future implementation of the Roma strategies in this regard, because we might continue working on such approach for another decade, because up to my knowledge, this is the third decade and still the problems remain the same, or finally change the direction. So this is, of course, easy to say when you are not in charge of the file. So that's also, I take it with a pinch of salt in my hands. But I truly believe that it is indeed about addressing the issue and addressing the problems where they are. And I guess one of the successes of the platform is that we also decided to take the things in the hands and work on the topic where the topic is. Then I would also like to address one misconception I think we often have when we discuss about what is needed for homeless. Is it only housing? Is it services? Is it etc.? I have impression that we start from the middle of the problem. So the middle of the problem is a homeless person on street or in shelter, and then solution is the next issue. But somehow this first part of the problem, which got the person to be homeless, is often disregarded. So in order really to address homeless properly, we have to think about what the root causes of the homelessness are. And when we know what the root causes of the homelessness are, as a policymakers, we can better address the issue. Because you don't address the issue at the end, it's like you address pension gap. People retire, and then what do you do about the gender pension gap? You have to address it way before. So this is, I think, something that we all have to have as a homework, that we all really need to think about this prevention element much more than it was thought in the past, and also something that will help us that the end result is not a person on the street or person in the shelter, but that it is preventing person from becoming homelessness. So this is something I wanted to share with you. On the middle class, I don't have a magic solution, and it's not the same. Well, the different approaches. Is it 30% for housing, the line that we must not cross, or 40% or 60%? Depends also on, of course, the income of the person or the family. It's not the same to have 40% of €1,000 and 40% of €6,000, etc., etc. So many challenges, I have to say. But whichever approach is taken, there has to be someone to take care of the most deprived. So this is absolutely something without any question that must never be forgotten. It's not an easy one. When you have lots of target groups, when you have lots of cohorts that need support, this is something that I would dare to say always has to be taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're approaching the last 5 minutes of our event. So first of all, thank you, Timo, for being with us online. Thank you to Giulio for being with us. Ruth, Katarina found it a very interesting panel. So what I just want to do in the last 4 to 5 minutes that we have now, I know we're running a bit over time, but we were also catching up a little bit for the previous panel. So thank you, colleagues, who did a great job, I think. Just want to ask a few, or I have asked 2 or 3 people in the audience to just share their, let's say, less than 1 minute takeaway message at the end of this event. What are you taking home to, I don't know, to tell your partner, your child, your dog, if you want to, about what you've learned at this event? And I'll be very quick on my own one. It's very simple. I learned something from Tom Deleu this morning, namely that the workers that build the houses that we were talking about cannot afford to live there, to buy there, to rent there. That was relatively new to me. But I also learned today that there are EU policy tools out there that have an impact on housing, which sort of answer the question why the EU should be dealing with housing to begin with. And I think we need to continue explaining that, because I don't think it's clear for very, very many people at this stage. I also want to share, and that's the last thing within my 1 minute, at the ETUI, we really want to keep this topic on the agenda. So bringing stakeholders like yourselves together, that's what we want to do. If you have data, if you have information, if you have analysis that can continue to keep housing, homelessness, these topics on the EU agenda, that can inform policymakers such as Ekaterina, such as Julia here around the table, we would be very happy to give that the visibility that it deserves. So that's just what I want to share at the end. Is Mara still here from the Chamber of Labor in Vienna? Mara, are you still around? I can't see her. She disappeared. Okay, because she wanted to say something in the end. That's fine. Amana, you're still here, though. I know that you've spoken already, but is there something that you are going to take home at the end of this event? Very brief, please. You can do that.
I'm definitely taking home, thank you very much, Bart, for the opportunity to speak again. I'm definitely taking home the reassurance that there is a commitment and that there is a meeting of the minds to continue to work on housing and access to housing, on affordable housing, not just social housing, and that there is an attention to vulnerable groups, which seems to be shared by everybody here. And of course, we can only hope that that also includes the Roma. So that's my main takeaway. And thank you also for the ETI for having us here.
Thank you. And I see that your neighbor also wants to share something. Less than 30 seconds?
First of all, shame on Europe. shame on us. Second thing, misconceptions. We learn without the people. We learn something human without the people. They are not there. We are talking about the Roms. They are next door, Rue Neuve. And so there are a lot of things we don't know about homeless. And there is a new trend, nomadism. A lot of people, they don't want a home anymore.
Very good 30 seconds. There is this saying, which I think is very important, nothing about us without us. So I take this as a lesson maybe for a next session about this topic. We will have people living these situations present in the room. That's a learning point that I take from you. Thank you. Lena from the Party of the European Left, are you still around? Yes, you're still there. I believe that you wanted to quickly share your less than 1 minute takeaway before we break for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you. My takeaway from this very interesting discussion is that housing is a very transversal topic. It's important for all our organization to be the relay of the voices of the people and about the situation. I think Pablo said with the current rent strike in the street of Barcelona today. Also that there is, it's about public policy and planning, as the housing crisis cannot just be solved with more investment, but with a better investment and more social conditionality. I think we need to work together for putting some pressure about the European Commission and the government, because indeed the issue is not new, and there is a lot of people who are working on this topic since years. It's have been said. We have an expertise on the situation. We have the proposal for the solution. It's good now that the Commission takes this subject, let's say, more officially, but there is a need to implement it with the tracts that will help the people and not the private market. And just to finish, we as the Party of the European Left, we will be working a lot on this housing topic in next year, 2025, with a campaign that will be very transversal in all our activities, because we are totally convinced that housing cannot be a privilege. Housing is a right linked to a decent life and a decent work. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for uploading a topic to the European Commission. And thank you, Ekaterina. We'll see you again at a future event. But you heard all of this, I'm reassured. Finally, there was Serge. Is Serge still around here? Serge, I believe, is a freelance journalist, and he also wanted to share final words. 30 seconds, please, Serge.
Thank you very much. My name is Serge Naciano. I belong to the medical sector, beginning. What can I say? The subject of today is was very interesting, but I think you didn't spoke about people who doesn't work. We spoke about people who have incoming and to put houses less expensive, but the people who are not working, what about them? What about the migrants who are coming every day in Europe, more and more? This is something also very, very important. So what can I say more? It's a big, big, big problem.
Thank you so much. Anyone else wants to share a final thought, or are we good to go? This is your last chance? No? Okay. Then the only thing I can say is thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you especially to our speakers. Don't forget to leave your headset where you found it before. Let me thank Maria and Beth for organizing this event and for giving it the visibility that it deserves also on social media. Greatly appreciated, colleagues. And as I said, we will keep on following this topic. And if you have any data analysis you want to share with us and that you want us to give visibility, that's what we're there for. Thank you so much. And we stay in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.